I am delighted to welcome you this morning for the beginning of this conference on learning the other's past, history, education, and curricula in Israel-Palestine. I am enormously grateful to Professor David Myers of UCLA and Professor Sami Adwam of Hebron University for having organized this. My name is Asla Bali. I'm the director of the Center for Near Eastern Studies here at UCLA, which is sponsoring the conference. Our center is a hub for academic research, scholarly collaboration, and support of undergraduate and graduate language study of the critical languages of the Middle East, as well as research and fieldwork for dissertation students who are working on the Middle East across a host of disciplines on our campus. We also serve as a resource to the UCLA campus and the broader public in bringing essential programming about the Middle East to our campus and to Los Angeles through public lectures, workshops, symposia, and conferences. This is a year of many anniversaries, many of them marking the region. I'm just going to mention another one, which is the 60th anniversary of this center, which was founded in 1957. And I can think of few better ways to mark that anniversary than by convening a conference like this one to address a critical question of our region, but to do so in a constructive way and in a way that shows us a path forward that is based on scholarship, on education, on collaboration, all of the values that we hope the center is able to bring here to UCLA. This conference is also an example of the kinds of investments the center is able to make in conjunction with faculty here at UCLA and the broader community in Los Angeles who are invested in seeing this kind of productive and important collaboration and scholarship on the region. So I just want to thank you and welcome you for being here. It's a fantastic program. I look forward to seeing you over the course of the 2 days. And with that, I would like to invite Professor Sami Adwam up from Hebron University. Please join me in welcoming him.
Good morning. Thank you very much for coming. It's an honor for us to hold this conference with so many scholars and researchers who are interested in really finding a way out of the conflict that has been struck us for the last 100 years. My name is Sami Adwam. I'm teacher trainers and also interested in peace education. After I was released from jail in 1991 as administrative detainee, I started working in peace education. And since then, I've been working that, and I will not give up. It's the only way forward, and we hope this will accumulate to a peaceful end soon. A year ago, almost, I got a call from David. He asked me, can we meet? And he was in rush, and we tried to find a time really to meet. And it was in between many meetings that he engaged with, but we were successfully meeting about 15, 20 minutes, 1 hour. So we thought maybe we can organize a conference that deal with the issue of history teaching, school books, and based on the prime, concepts, which is the dual narrative, learning each other's historical narrative, Palestinian and Israelis. And the idea came very rapidly, I think, is either because of the interest of him and his institution, or the prime also desire to be able to use education as a means to for peace building, because education could be trapped into continual perpetuating the conflict, and that's heavily seen in Palestine and Israeli as such, with different level of symmetry between both. So that's then this idea of thought came to realization. I would like to thank also David very much, because he's behind all these logistics, and his team and all his organizations. Before going further, I just would like to speak a few points, anecdote kind of relating to history. I mean, history itself, history education, school books, and history teaching is very important means and ways to construct who we are and who we were and how we see the futures. The history is not the past, it's not the present, I think it's the futures. And there's no way of addressing the future without trying really to address the essence of the historical narrative that Palestinian, and specific and Israeli, still hold up to this date, which we feel create a strong impediment for peace, an impediment for reconciliation, which is that's one thing. The other thing, in conflict situation, I think we become what we call it victims of our historical narrative. And it's clear in our research that we did with Professor Danny Bartal when we reviewed the Palestinian-Israeli school books, how we are manipulated by history, selective part of history that support the ideology of what we've been doing to justify it and also to garner much more support to continue the situation. And that's really a very striking, influence of history when it comes to realization of that. History is become part of our social psychological identity, how we see ourselves, our past, and how we see the others who we are engaged in. So that's really important. So history is always manipulated. And we should be very responsible. If you're a historian, if you're a student of history, if you are educators, if you are teachers, you have to be aware that history could be manipulated easy and could be bracketed and used in one direction rather than others. And there's no neutral history. That's also another thing we should be careful with. And because whatever we describe an event or a situation, it is filtered with our own subjective ideology, subjective prejudices, our ability to see and analyze the situation. So it's not easy to be to have an objective history. That's one anecdote I think we got to learn through our working in the dual narrative. The other thing, there's no end to history. History is a discipline where the more you write, the more you discover you should write more and more. So there's no end. It's unfortunate, but it is true, because nobody can claim that he writes a comprehensive description or documentation of any events or any situation. And the difficulty with history is that it couldn't be understood by analyzing the events. You have to analyze the pretexts or the causal before why this event happened, and you have to analyze it. Then you analyze the narrative, the event itself or the incident. Then that's not enough. You have to also analyze the post-event, what happened after that, because that's the way you could, I think, come close to understand that historical event. So before and after, that's important part of it. And there's no issue of right or wrong. It's issue of selecting what you want to select part of history. The Israeli selects some part of history that magnify their ideology, and the Palestinian also, select part of the history that magnifies their position, and so that's a selective approach to history, which is that. It's difficult to compare histories, by the way. It's not an easy way to compare history, and especially in the Palestinian-Israeli, which we live in a completely asymmetric situation. People will say we are in conflict, of course, but we are in more conflict. I think the term should be straightened in a way to realize that we are not really in just conflict. We have to deal with the issue of occupation. There's occupation, there's limitation, there's a process of occupation that continues every day on the Palestinian side, regardless of the terms that we are used to jargon in our days. So we appreciate that a group of researcher, interest responsible people coming to this very sensitive issues, and not to play down the history and responsibility. History comes with responsibility, because as historian or as an individual who tried to look critically at what historical narrative that you have, it comes with complete consequence of responsibility. Why I'm saying this? We started to look into, to move the discussion and the research between Palestinian and Israelis from political issues to social psychological issues. And we tried to talk about how the Palestinian narrate the Nakba and how the Israeli narrate the Holocaust. And we want both sides to be able to approach this issue, which is very sensitive. And we found that responsibility is a very important part of how we look at things, how we understand, how we run. So the responsibility it could lay on us, but it could lay on the shoulder of our generation. That's important when we deal with historical narrative in that sense. When we talk about history writing, that's one thing. when we talk about education of history, school books, that's another thing. And our colleagues are very experienced here in how school books being formatted or being authored and how much it's manipulated that limit even the ability to integrate some part of history in school textbooks. So that's why we think it's very important, even if in both sides, in Israel and Palestine, history school books are controlled by both ministries, and you dare not to touch these issues. It's a prerogative responsibility, and you will be outcasted, criticized, etc. if you deal with history, deal or discuss any historical event in a situation or in an orientation that in contrary with the political format of history or whatever orientated. That's why history is continued to be as an exploited means and discipline to define who we are and who is the others and about the responsibility. Political conflict and occupation is undermining any attempt to improve the education system. We were thinking of two formulas to deal with this issue. One, we call it top-down approach, which means to deal with changing the policy, the curricula statement, and that's need political decisions, and that's we lack it. We were engaged in negotiation for the last, 20 years, 27 years, more or less, and reach a dead end, nothing there. So it's a stalemate, so there's no hope. That's why we think about bottom-up approach, which try really to create or put incident or seeds or issues that really could be built on. Hopefully that will increase the people who believe in that, and then to bring a change. And that's not easy process because it's not sustainable. It's not supported by the political parties and people who engage in this, and those who in the rooms. I know what I'm talking about. They become vulnerable to so much criticism and so much, discredited in that. Though Oslo Agreement, if you remember Oslo Agreement, there's one article, I think number 13 or 11, I'm not sure, emphasize that both sides should look into their education system, to look at it. And it's a call for each side to be. This initiation never took place for different reasons. In Annapolis meeting also, there were one proposal came out to start a trilateral committee to deal with the issue of school books and teaching, and never happened. If you ask me why, I can answer it. If you don't ask me why, you have to look for it, why this committee has not been formed or become active up to this point. So here we are, we're trying as educators, as teacher trainers, school books author, to try to work the hardest way from what we call it bottom-up approach. And of course, we cannot dispense actually the top-down formula. But until that comes, we should continue, I think, really this path. Otherwise, we will be, trapped into this insanity that's still going on. I still believe, I can claim believe, in a two-state solutions. This should be highlighted. Even nationalism and nationality become today irrelevant in some countries. You look at the United States, look at Europe, but still I think a two-state solution where Palestine state to be established on 1967 border with East Jerusalem, its capital, living side by side Israel, that's a dream and a hope, and needs people to really take this responsibility into their hands and hearts and try to push for that. Otherwise, we are doomed to continue the occupation. And to elaborate just a little bit, so I know you are very well educated. We have about 1,600 Palestinian prisoners, political prisoners, are on this hunger strike. And today is 32 days of their hunger strike. And their call is very basic. They want to improve their imprisonment conditions. Of course, they call it salt and water strike. And that expected to lead to kind of freedom, proving their condition in jail, and to be free also. They are political prisoners. They should be also, dealt with. I would just want to summarize that Israeli occupation in the West Bank is not only threatening the Palestinian identity history, also is threatening the continuation of conflict that really threatens the whole region. And it's very fearful to think about how the future would be, and when that will happen. How does it look? Is it too late, or is it we didn't do much, or what happened? So I hope with you as a group of researchers, scholars, and students engage in a very productive discussions throughout these days and sessions, and really I encourage you. And I think the most important thing, which is I like to use a critical approach to history. And I always started to think, what if history is an issue to be discussed? So we encourage you to really engage in a real and responsible discussions, and to get some synergy and energy to look forward than backward. I would like just to, especially recognize the Palestinian-Israeli teachers, maybe they're here, yeah, who really very brave enough to work on this project all these years in very difficult time. We started this project at the beginning of the second Intifada, and they were brave enough to continue working, in these days, and they themselves discover how important education, how important school books, how important to prepare a generation who believes in who believes there are different narrative in history, who believes in their right and the others people's rights. Because it's not more an issue that I believe in my right and I deny or exclude the other rights. And I would just like to appreciate them and applaud them. If you want to applaud them with me, that's nice. I would like to end with this saying, and I don't know who said it, sometimes I forget. There's two sayings I would like to end. You cannot be free until I be free, and I cannot be free until you are free. That's one thing. The other thing, which is much more complicated, I cannot be what I want to be unless you be what you want to be. And you cannot be what you want to be unless I want to be I be what I want to be. It's difficult, yeah? I cannot repeat it even more. The other thing is also a very active peace education, Quakers activists. She said, the enemy is the one that we didn't hear or read their story yet. And I wish you good luck, and we should enjoy the next 2 days session. Thank you very much.
I will start my lecture first to talk, Sami, my colleague, start to talk about Palestinians. And it's very important to clarify for the audience that we, after the establishment of the State of Israel, we divided in 4 groups of Palestinians. So it's important to know in my research, in my studies, which groups I will present here, because there is different education system for the 4th group in Israel. So the first group, as you see, we have the 1948 Palestinian, the citizen of the State of Israel. And the second group is 1967 Palestinian East Jerusalem school education system, and the West Bank and Gaza and the refugees. In my lecture, I will talk about the 1967 and the West Bank and Gaza. I will not mention the Israeli-Palestinian group where they live in Israel, because they have different system of education and not the refugees outside the country. I will try to do my best not to talk about method, but the most important for me when I analyze since 2009 textbooks, to take this in front of my eyes. A control of education curricula and textbook content is an instrument of a great power. So control serves the educational authority in order to shape identity inside the group in question. And this is what lead me when I'm doing analysis of textbooks. Important to know 2 things. First things, the Palestinian textbooks has no power because they are product and written under occupation, as Sami mentioned. No freedom. There is direct and indirect censorship, and I will talk about these two censorship. The focus of this studies, and there are 3 studies, I will present it first shortly in less than 2 minutes. How the textbook represents the other and who is the other. How the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is presented in history school textbook for Palestinian people in Palestine and East Jerusalem. And the third one, which historical event related to the conflict and to the Palestinian identity were presented or omitted from the textbooks. So I will start to give like a historical review, a short historical review about the education system in Palestine, just to understand how this textbook started. Following the Arab-Israeli war in 1948, the Gaza Strip came under Egyptian administration, while the West Bank was governed by Jordan. The same Jordanian and Egyptian textbooks continue to be used in Palestinian school, but were censored by the Israeli military education commandant. And Palestinian pupils use textbooks that were produced according to the Jordanian Egyptian education, philosophies, ideologies, objectives, and goals. And the Palestinians use the Jordanian and the Egyptian textbook in West Bank and in Gaza Strip. However, the whole education system of Palestinians was run by the Israeli military, and only later the Israeli civilian administration. All public education institutions were transferred after Oslo process to the Palestinian National Authority, but the Egyptian and the Jordanian textbook were still used in Palestinian schools for some time until their gradual replacement by the Palestinian textbooks. The Palestinians began to put some of the material about Palestine in textbooks, but they started to produce their own textbooks and take responsibility. A process started in 2000. Since then, from 2000 until 2008, since then they have been used in almost all Palestinian schools in West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. And the question, why in East Jerusalem? Because Israel is controlled the education center in East Jerusalem. So the question is East Jerusalem school use textbook of the Palestinian National Authority, and they are censored by the Israeli Ministry of Education, and I will talk about the censorship here. The first result, images of self. I will take the first, which images of the self and the other in the Palestinian textbook in the West Bank. First, to strengthen the Palestinian identity and the collective memory to the pupil in Palestine. This is the first aim of Palestinian, not to show what's happened in Israel. Finally, we have our own textbook. Finally, we do that. So this is the most important for the Palestinians. The general philosophy for the Palestinian society as protect of codes, its religions, its heritage, its values, its customs, the Palestinian people ambition to protect their land, their historical right, and their national identity. The 1988 Declaration of the Independence and the ministry's policy of preparing upstanding Palestinians. So this is quotes from the books, from the curricula. From that, the curricula is based on faith in God and Islam, the Palestinian cause, justice and belonging, identity with the Ummah, the great Muslim nation, and a center rule of the education in Palestinian society. And here my question, and for sure you will ask me, okay, what about the Christian Palestinian in Palestine? I will deal with this later. We have the self-image is religion identity coming from Muslim part of the great Muslim nation. We have a national identity coming from Palestinian justice and belonging to the land of Palestine. Both we create a civil Palestinian society. And the second result of the second study conflict and the presentation of the other. The first other is Europe. Everyone will think it's Israel. The second other is Jewish nationalism and Zionism. So first of all, when they talk about the other, they talk about what's happened in Europe. And textbook present the rule of the conflict, the Crusaders, the colonialism, and the Zionism movement. So they present Europe in positive and negative way. The positive way is revolution, democracy, liberal civilization, and etc., modernity and science. The negative of Europe is the Crusader, paving the way to the colonialism. This is Britain, France, Italy, and Spain, and so on. And in ultimately, they bring the Zionism, Israel. And this is a positive image, but this is the negative image. Crusader attack Palestine. And when I'm going to see how they present the colonialism in the Middle East, that we can see that they're making the language of the colonializing state, the language of the education in order to propagate Western culture, fighting against the Arabic language, dissolving the Arabic armies, fragmenting the Arabic country, and so on. Yes, you see here how they call, this is quotes from the book. The current conflict with conflict is with the Zionism movement and not Israel as a state. Framing the Zionism movement and Zionism colonialism as continuation of European colonialism, imperialism. This is how they see, this is how they present Israel. And if we talk about omitted or present narratives, as Sami mentioned before, which narrative I want to present in my textbook, if my aim is to strengthen the identity of the Palestinian. So the Holocaust is example. The Holocaust is not mentioned in any textbook in Palestinian National Authority, and the reason was three. So I didn't find any mention about the Holocaust. There is, but it's important to say that there is a denial of the Holocaust, and not, but not ignore the Holocaust. So if you talk about the people, if you review, sorry, there is, yes. Sorry, but if you talk about people, there is not a denial of the Holocaust, but they're rather ignoring the Holocaust. So they didn't put the Holocaust in any textbook. But if you talk about people, they said, okay, we know about the Holocaust. Sometimes we talk about it, but this is not the time, this is not the place to put the Holocaust and to mention it in our textbook. So the reason is a political reason. And when I ask why, the reason is until the moment that Israel is not recognize our 1948 and take the Nakba and take responsibility about what's happened, so we will not mention anything about the Holocaust. So this is the reason. And as attacking Palestinian school books in all the world, and they said, is Israel is a state recognized in the map in Palestinian textbook? I discovered yes, there is. There is two maps. The first one and the second one. The first one is talking about the historical national Palestine, and when you talk about them, where is Palestine, where is Israel, they will say in 1936 there is no Israel. So why we should mention it? So this is a historical map. The second one, when they start the negotiation to talk about the Israel, they start to mention Jewish state and Arabic state. It's very difficult to see, but people read Arabic, they can see Dawlat al-Yahud and Dawlat al-Arab. Another two maps I found. It's in the big, you can see here Israel, and you can see Israel. It's the Sharon map, plan, and the Green Line map. And the Palestinian people in West Bank, they learn about the Green Line. But in Israel, they know there is no mention for the Green Line. I'm a Palestinian-Israeli. I never mentioned, they didn't mention anything about the Green Line in my books. Maybe now, shortly, they start. I'm talking about the education system for the Palestinians. What's happened what's happened about the censorship when it's come? Israeli censorship of Palestinian textbook in East Jerusalem. I discovered three very important things. First, when these textbooks enter to Israel, so there is three things we can see. First, erasing symbols. second leaving out segments, or sometimes they're deleting the content of the whole chapters, pages. I will give example. This is a book from Palestine. This is a Palestinian from the West Bank. So if you see here, there is here, it's very difficult to see in the map, but I bring example here. There is Dawlat, this is Dawlat Palestine, this is the state of Palestine and the Ministry of Education. So they take responsibility about the book. And what's happened when this book entered to East Jerusalem, so it's coming without this stamp. You know, they take the stamp here. And again, this is inside the cover of the book, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of the God, and it's the same what's happened, they take this out. This is when they say, take some of the thing. The second thing, I discovered they delete some facts in the view of Palestinian. This is important. Zionism movement and Zionism colonialism as continuation of European colonialism imperialism. So this quotes from the book. When the book entered to Israel, this is another example. So this is talk about chapter of Zionism, Sahyoniya. And when it's entered to East Jerusalem, so here it's written, it's very difficult, but I have the book here. It's Ma Ahdaf al-Sahyoniya. What's the aim of the Zionism? There is no aim for the student in East Jerusalem, so it's empty pages. They take it away. There is another example regarding the UK. For example, Great Britain granting land, it did not own it, Palestine, to a movement that did not deserve it, the Zionism movement, at the expense of the Arab Palestinian people who both own and deserve it, or so on. This, for example, they delete it from the textbook when it's entered to East Jerusalem. The definition of the Zionism movement is also deleted. RSS's ideology, because the first word, RSS's ideology, political movement that appeared in the second half of the 19th century, it aimed to create a state that embodied the frame, a land without people for a people without land, mixing religion and so on. This is quote from the book. Also, this was deleted in the when it's entered to East Jerusalem school. Another thing, it's important in Palestine, pupils they study a little bit shortly about the Palestinian cause, you know, and this is really a reality that it's very, it shocked me when but when this book, this is the book in when it's entered, and it's very, very important to see this live, because when I check it and I took, this is the book, and I want to see the Palestinian pupil, what he said about the Palestinian cause, this, you know, this is what he said. What he said, it's a blank pages, you know, the whole chapter is like this, you know. You don't see any play. I'm really doing analysis of textbooks more than 10 years. This was shocked for me either. This is the pages, you know, okay, I will finish it. This is the chapter, the whole chapter is what deleted. So this is what the Israeli did. So my conclusion, you know, I want to be a little bit optimistic in this. So Palestinian textbooks are censored both by third-party donor or by Israeli government. But if the Palestinians in the West Bank, they are censored by the World Bank and Belgium and the European state who give them the money to produce their own textbook. So if they will want to say something really badly about Israel or not to recognize the right of Israel, they can't if they want even to do that because there is a censorship. And the second one, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is presented not as a religion conflict between Jews and Muslims, but as a nationalist conflict against the Zionism movement ideology, which does not recognize the right of the Palestinian people to their land and their existence as a nation, does not include any information against Judaism as a religion or as a religions community in textbooks. No racism in textbook, but there is a selection of fact. I did not find any anti-Semitic language in any books in the study, but I mentioned before, as I mentioned before, concepts such as occupation, they mention a lot, attacked, war, refugees, apartheid. When they talk about apartheid, they put a picture for North Africa and not for Israel, but they mentioned the apartheid and discrimination against Arab in Israel are found often. There was no representation of the subject of the Holocaust, and this is, in my opinion, is bad, because there is a selection details that the people in Palestine, they didn't know anything about what's going on today, about Israel and the establishment of the State of Israel. So this fact is not there in textbook, and text is always, as mentioned also Sami, based on one legitimate narrative. So no, the Nakba is not covered too in the textbook, but they present refugees problem and some event like the first and the second Intifada. There is no mention of massacres, killing, etc. Discussion, while the Palestinian issues textbook, they still do not have the power, in my opinion, what I saw, within a context of occupation, including another narrative. The Palestinian National Authority is not ready. Because I'm not related just in textbook, I'm going there to Ramallah, I'm sitting with the people writing textbook, and I ask him why. And they tell me we are not ready now to write really under occupation the other narrative for Israel, because Israel is not taking any responsibility about 1948. And moving forward, recommendation, as educator in the Hebrew, I think in both sides it should include all relevant historical fact in the Holocaust or in the Nakba, and leave it to the student to develop a narrative and opinion about these. This is a key in development critical thinking. So thank you so much. If you need more detail, I can send it to you.
I'm here to talk about intersecting narratives, but my dissertation topic is actually the relationship between the Palestinian Arab citizens and the State of Israel. And it's a road I started many years ago, but a certain class trip to Nazareth with Professor Yazbak was definitely a very important stop on that road. So thank you. And I'll start. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is stuck. Reconciliation between the Israelis and the Palestinians is getting harder to imagine by the day. What is also stuck is the study of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Most research, coming from the left or from right, from pro-Zionist or anti-Zionist scholars, most research approaches the conflict as if it were a real estate dispute. It features two sides. Two sides are defined as nations, more or less cohesive. Each nation has a claim to the same piece of land in the Eastern Mediterranean, 100% of that land. On the one hand, you have Zionism. On the other, Palestinians, Palestinian nationalism. And it's simple, it's neat. The problem with this national real estate dispute approach is that it's tautological and anachronistic. It assumes that these two groups, they're ready-made, they're diametrically opposed to each other, they're belligerent, they have not essentially changed, and they have wanted one thing, the entirety of the land for themselves. Any willingness to compromise, any moderation, is considered pragmatic or tactical, but not essential to the core of either Zionism or Palestinian nationalism. A certain circular historical explanation has taken root. The animosity between Zionism and Palestinian nationalism is the cause of the conflict, it is the conflict, and it perpetuates the conflict. The two sides are so ontologically hostile, their perceptions are so opposite that history education experts recommend pupils learn from textbooks and curricula featuring the dual narratives. In college syllabi, professors define as a course goal student familiarization with the way the two narratives are diametrically opposite. Now, cultivating a sensibility for narrative is important. It's critical. I myself would probably not have been able to question my own Israeli mainstream convictions without introduction to the term narrative, or in Hebrew, narrative. Here, however, I want to propose a critique of narratives and cautiously claim that talking about two opposite narratives makes it difficult for us to notice and explore a political tradition within Zionism of recognizing, if not adopting, aspects of the Palestinian narrative. By failing to acknowledge this tradition and its demise, we may be perpetuating the very teleological notions historians should aim to deconstruct. Instead of narratives diverging, I want to talk about moments of narrative intersection. I want to talk about two moments, one before 1948 and the one afterwards, moments when Zionists saw the conflict through Palestinian eyes. They did so not because they were not Zionists or they were any less Zionists. They did so precisely because they were Zionists, because they were willing to embrace the indigenous narrative for their own indigenizing purposes. The first moment is the Iron Wall by Jabotinsky. There are similar moments, earlier ones, Echad Ha'am, Yitzhak Epstein, Hugo Bergman, Berdow Borochov, and even Ben-Gurion. But the Iron Wall, I think, today has become the piece which historians used to speak about a default Zionist position, one that's in Zionist true essence, and one that all mainstream leaders eventually adopt, all mainstream Zionist leaders. Jabotinsky begins this seminal piece with the assertion, voluntary agreement between the Zionist movement and the Palestinian Arabs is not possible. So far, this seemed straight out of Bibi, Bennett, and Lapid's talking points. But when Jabotinsky enters the analysis of why agreement is not possible, when he gets into the causes for the conflict, there's almost a difference of night and day between then and today. According to Jabotinsky, the impossibility of an agreement did not stem from Arab fanaticism or violent tendencies. It was a result of the simple parameters of the conflict, which pitted the other side as natives and the Zionists as colonizers. Jabotinsky did not simply accede to the fact that Palestine was where Arabs happened to currently live. It was, and I quote, their national home. These Arabs, who he addresses as Palestinian Arabs, with an emphasis on the IAN, Indian, are comparable to the Sioux tribe in America, the Reds, the Papuan people, the Aztecs of Mexico. The Jews coming to Palestine were like Cortez and Pizarro and America's pilgrim fathers. For Jabotinsky, the fundamental cause for the conflict between the Zionists and the Arabs was that, and I quote, all natives resist colonists. Simple. Notice how different Jabotinsky's analysis was than the one someone who claims to be his devout follower more recently. Let's take, for instance, Minister of Defense Avigdor Lieberman. Per Lieberman, Palestinian terrorism, and the weird phrasing is the original, it's not mine, is caused by the non-implementation of the vision of the pan-Arab principle as was led by Nasser, there shall be no alien non-Arab presence in the region. And then Lieberman adds, lately extreme Muslim influences were added here which enhance these trends and aspirations. So it's not as if Lieberman here is a hawk compared to Jabotinsky, who's a dove. Both are obvious advocates of force. But Jabotinsky has no problem recognizing the Palestinian status as an indigenous population that is not willing to share the land constituting its national home. In contrast, Lieberman's arguments presumed that the Palestinian grievances against Israel stem from their ties outside of Palestine, their Arabness and Muslim faith. These are the center of his argument. Moving on to the next moment. This was the first one. The second one is April 56, a funeral for Roy Rothberg, a 21-year-old civilian security officer of Kibbutz Nachal Oz, who was killed by assailants from the Gaza Strip. And of course, I'm referring to a famous eulogy by Moshe Dayan. And this is how it goes. Yesterday with daybreak, Ro'i was murdered. The quiet of the spring morning blinded him, and he did not see the stalkers for his soul on the furrow. Let us not hurl blame at the murderers. Why should we complain of their hatred for us? 8 years they have sat in the refugee camps of Gaza and seen with their own eyes how we have made a homeland of the soil and the villages where they and their forebears once dwelt. This eulogy has been used again and again to prove whatever point anyone wanted to make about Zionism's essence. Some used it to show how committed Zionists are to the sword and have had no feelings of remorse in the face of suffering of Palestinians. But the point I want to make about Zionism when I'm quoting this is to demonstrate how Dayan, like Jabotinsky, could appreciate Palestinian attachment to the land. And now added to that is a sympathy with the way the Palestinians viewed the outcome of the 1948 war, Israel's war of independence, but their own catastrophe, the Nakba. The eulogy has been published at the time in right-wing and left-wing Zionist dailies with no contention and with full appreciation of the author's powerful rhetoric. Compare this simple Zionist admission that the other side's grievances are reasonable. Compare that with today's endless preoccupation with Israeli and Palestinian intentions entering the 1948 war. Zionists today seem to be unable to recognize what Dayan could easily do. Dayan saw no need to claim, as Zionists do today, that if there was a Palestinian catastrophe, then they brought it on themselves. What to make of this lost tradition of Zionist identification with Palestinian positions, even Palestinian pain? It's tempting to frame them as a sort of naive or even juvenile Zionism that couldn't withstand the realities of the conflict. Some will call this liberal Zionism. This suggests that liberalism is somehow not innate in Zionism. But I propose there's a different, non-essentialist way to understand the past flexibility of Zionism. Instead of understanding Zionism as simply a national movement, hell-bent from its inception to create a homogeneous Jewish state, I think it's more productive to conceptualize it as a settler colonial movement. In recent years, talking about Zionism as settler colonialism has become popular with scholars, mostly supporters of BDS. Settler colonialism sounds biting. It sounds even more biting than colonialism. There's also a tendency by these scholars and commentators to not fully understand what settler colonialism actually means. So contrary to how most people talk about it, settler colonialism is not colonialism on steroids. It's actually something very different. It's even antithetical to colonialism. Without entering into the rich theory behind the concept, settler colonial states are those have been established through movement of settlers from one part of the world to another, transforming that territory into an independent country, separate from a colonial center. Why did Zionists once, as settlers, recognize realities that would later become central pillars of the Palestinian narrative? So here are a few provisional explanations. One explanation requires us to think about colonialism and settler colonialism, to not think of them as just conscious ideologies. It's better to understand colonialism and settler colonialism as relationships, very different ones, relationships that produce completely different results. Colonialism, as Fanon, Memi, and Said have told us, is characterized by a colonized-colonizer binary that eventually leads to the withdrawal of the colonizers and the creation of indigenous-led nation-states. Conversely, settler colonialism blurs binaries, turning settlers into natives and turning natives into citizens of the settler state. While settler colonial histories and colonial histories are both intermixed and filled with violence, what is often forgotten about settler colonialism is that alongside the wars, the massive depopulation, and even acts of genocide, alongside all of that, settler colonial histories, as California will show you, tend to eventually move into peaceful parameters. Success for settlers consistently involves perpetual reconfiguration of the political and cultural arena settlers and indigenous both inhabit. In colonialism, we usually see escalating violence leading to the creation of a native nation state. In settler colonialism, alongside violence, we see things such as recognition of native title, creation of limited indigenous sovereignty, binational treaties, and national reconciliation processes. Accordingly, compared to national movements in colonialism, settler movements, particularly successful settler movements, display a far greater flexibility, to imagine and reimagine their own identity and the identity of their native adversaries. Zionism in its earlier stages was no different. But unlike the Americans and Australians, when Zionists encountered their indigenous counterparts, they could not imagine them as a dying breed. Until the very end of the 1920s, all forms of mainstream Zionist parties could not foresee the mass exodus of 1948. Now, since the Palestinian Arabs were relatively strong and would not go the way of the Aborigines or the Native Americans, Zionists from left and right were drawn to visions of shared political framework for Jews and Arabs of Palestine. The binationalist early Zionist political agenda necessitated imagining the Palestinians as an entity separate from the surrounding Arab countries, a collective that's closer to the Zionist collective. In other words, imagining the Palestinians as distinct from Arab Muslim environment in its attachment to Palestine was practically the only way to imagine a viable Zionism. Now, the assumption that Jews and Arabs will always inhabit the same land required Zionists to see things from a Palestinian perspective, to humanize and even empathize with the indigenous adversary, to imagine them as eventually become less of a problem, less indigenous. This feeling of common connection to the land, which Jews shared with Palestinian Arabs, also enabled settlers to collectively indigenize by differentiating themselves, the Sabra, the one connected to the land, with the diaspora. But if Zionist recognition of Palestinian indigeneity, is tied to the Zionist inability to imagine the Palestinians' physical dislodgement, what explains the mournful and empathetic words of Dayan and others, Sami Adwam, for instance, uttered when dislocation was not only possible, but actually occurred? So a partial answer would be that Dayan's empathy is actually the magnanimity of the victor, which today has been replaced by a Zionist siege mentality. But this could only be a partial answer, because in reality, the years after 48 and 56 were not secure, at least not more secure than today. Refugees beckoned at Israel's porous borders, and their return was still on the international community's agenda. Economically, the new state was struggling. And then there was a new charismatic regime in Egypt that made threats and orchestrated deadly terrorist attacks. So it's not just the objective stability of the settler project that plays into when settlers empathize with indigenous. How can we otherwise explain settlers adopting an indigenous narrative? So here's a shot. Settler empathy, I believe, has to do with a certain aspect of the settler colonial psychology. Settlers, unlike colonists, tend to imagine a future wherein the indigenous presence in the land they control is progressively erased, and they themselves become increasingly indigenous. But expressing grief for the demise of the indigenous population is a way of asserting a narrative that indigenous supersession is a done deal, and that the settlers, by being able to feel the pain of the displaced indigenous, are now the new indigenous people who inherited the land. Voicing regret is a way to move forward after the deed is done. In 1967, this changes. After the takeover of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, once again, Zionists are faced with a territory with a significant and threatening indigenous presence. So what I want to say is, I don't want to repeat the old liberal Zionist cliche that Zionism before 67 was good and after 67 was bad. But what I am saying is that after 67, and the reasons can be discussed throughout my career, Jews and Palestinians began to interact and to constitute each other. The relationship worked in a different way. The relationship progressively became less settler colonial and more colonial. In 1967, Zionist policies of governing the occupied territories progressively abandoned the assumption of a future Palestinian-Jewish integration or cohabitation, but it also found it very hard to imagine another Nakba. So instead, slowly, Israelis began to structure their economy, their society, and their culture on not Palestinian displacement, but on Palestinian subordination. Subordination as colonial history has taught us, is a very ineffective way to quell indigenous grievances, or even to reduce indigenous numbers. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict increasingly became an escalating colonial dispute, and the escalating coloniality is at the heart of the Zionist inability to see the other side's fundamental humanity and their pain. But colonial Zionism did not only change the way Zionists look at Palestinians. Zionists nowadays have largely abandoned their claim to the land by using the honest but true narrative of conquest, and they swapped it with a narrative, predominantly with the narrative of Jewish divine right. All Jews, irrespective of where they may live, have a right to Eretz Israel. This type of narrative also makes it more difficult for Jews to recognize the common love of country that both Israelis and Palestinians possess. Zionist Israelis, and this is the final thing I'm going to say, Zionist Israelis should ask themselves whether unwillingness to empathize with their co-patriots, the Palestinians, and to prefer to identify with those who voluntarily choose not to live in Eretz Israel. And I'm looking at you, American Zionists. Zionists should ask themselves if this is serving them well in their quest to indigenize.
So, my talk will focus on learning about the other's past in an Israeli context. That is to say, in the context of Jewish and Palestinian Israelis, in the context of Jewish and Palestinian Israeli citizens. More specifically, I will focus on the work of the Or Commission, a state commission of inquiry that was established in November 2000 to investigate the clashes between security forces and Israeli citizens in October of that year, events that are popularly known as the October 2000 events. The main points that I would like to make today are the following. First, the Or Commission, in its capacity as a formal arm of the State of Israel, acknowledged that history and memory constitute a national resource for all intents and purposes. In this respect, according to the Commission, reconciliation between Jewish and Arab Israelis requires both the Jewish majority and the Arab minority to be open and sensitive to the other's past and to the way each one of them understands what the State of Israel represents or should represent. Arabs should acknowledge that for the Jewish mainstream, Israel is the realization of national aspirations and the age-old Jewish longing for a return to the Holy Land. At the same time, the Jewish majority in Israel and the state itself should acknowledge that the establishment of Israel constituted for Arab citizens a national catastrophe, a Nakba, in which they, the indigenous population of the country, people of the country, turned to be a minority in their own land. Almost 15 years after the Or Commission issued its final report, and it did so in September 2003, it seems that the Commission was not necessarily instrumental in increasing historical awareness and openness among Jewish and Arab Israeli citizens. To date, the political discourse in Israel is largely characterized, as it has been in the last decade or so, by two opposing trajectories. One that stresses the Jewish and democratic nature of the state, and an alternative one that seeks to resolve the apparent contradiction between democracy and Israel's nature as a Jewish state. While the factors which have shaped this current political discourse exceed the scope of this presentation, I would suggest that the Or Commission is an important case study that demonstrates a failure of what seems to be a powerful legal body, at least on paper, to mobilize a social change and increase historical awareness among Israeli citizens. The case study of the Or Commission could therefore be used as what is called in logic an appeal from the contrary, a kind of a historical road sign, which basically tells us not what should be done, to revise Israeli perceptions of the past, but rather what are the factors and circumstances that stands in the way of increasing historical awareness. To make these points clearer, I will outline my talk as follows. First, I'll briefly talk about the circumstances that led to the establishment of the Orr Commission in November 2000. Then I'll present the main conclusions the commissions reached and the main recommendations it made as a result. And finally, I will conclude this presentation by pointing out some factors that most likely prevented the Orr Commission from instigating a change and increasing historical awareness in Israel. Just before I proceed, I should note that during this talk I will use the terms Arab citizens, the Arab sector, the Arab minority, and Arab-Israeli citizens interchangeably. That is to say, not the term Palestinian-Israeli citizens, just because this is the terminology the Orr Commission used, and I will try, obviously, to present its work in the most accurate way I can. So, to remind you, the October 2000 events were a milestone in the relations between Jews and Arabs, the Jewish majority in the Palestinian minority in Israel, and between the Arab sector and the state itself. According to the Commission, it was a point of no return in the relations between the two sectors. The events were characterized, they were basically unprecedented in their scope and in their intensity. More specifically, we talk about clashes, protest demonstration by Arab citizens in different parts of the country with Israeli security forces, basically means the Israeli police, not the IDF. Closure of main traffic arteries, especially in the areas of close to Arab towns, especially in the area of Wadi Ara that connects central Israel with the Galilee, and in the Galilee itself, in the district of Misgav. And in some cases, the assailants were, in fact, Jewish citizens who attacked Arab Palestinians, Arab Israelis. The events actually began in late September when back then member of Knesset Ariel Sharon visited the Temple Mount Harm el-Sharif, an event that retrospectively symbolizes the beginning of the Second Intifada that lasted almost 5 years, that claimed the lives of thousands of Palestinians and Israelis and led to serious recessions in Israeli and Palestinian economies. The October 2000 events took place within the Green Line. Okay. It's not the Intifada itself. It lasted 12 days and claimed the life of 13 Israeli citizens, 12 Arabs who got killed, some people say were murdered by Israeli security forces, and one Jewish Israeli citizen whose car was stoned by Arab demonstrators. And as you can see on the screen, this is a photo from the front page of Yediot Achronot, an Israeli, what used to be the most popular daily newspaper in Israel, and the title says that the fire spread to Israeli Arabs. In other words, the notion, the feeling was that the Intifada that started in the West Bank and Gaza Strip find its way to Israel, to the Green Line. And this is exactly how not the Orr Commission studied this event. According to the Commission, according to the mandate of the Commission, the October 2000 events were an internal Israeli affair for all intents and purposes. The mandate required the Commission to basically investigate two things. First, the clashes between citizens and the security forces beginning September 29. That's why the Commissions focused only on events that took place in October and not in September. And second, to reach conclusions and make recommendations regarding the causes that led to their occurrences. This may seem like a naive article, but in fact, it's quite unique in comparison to the mandates of many other Israeli and non-Israeli commissions of inquiry for two main reasons. First, governments who set up commissions of inquiry really don't like the idea that external bodies, such as commissions of inquiry, will tell them what to do, to make recommendations, to tell them what should be done. Most Israeli commissions chose to make recommendations. The law allows them to do so. The law does not require governments to accept and implement these recommendations. Second point is the second requirement of the Orr Commission, to investigate the causes that led to their occurrences. This opens a window onto a historical investigations for all intents and purposes without setting clear chronological boundaries. And that's exactly what the Or Commission did, and it's quite exceptional in comparison to other Israeli commissions of inquiry. So first, the commission studied 10 days in October, 10 extremely violent days that took place in October 2000. But then it undertook a historical investigation that focused more or less on two things. First, on social and political processes that took place within the Arab sector for decades, for tens of years. For example, ideological radicalizations of young Palestinian Israelis, increasing identification with the Palestinian struggle for self-determination, Islamization, Israelization, and things like that. The second point was the study of the history of the actual contact points between the state and the Arab sector. For example, the history of protest demonstrations since especially the Land Day of 1976, which constitute a milestone in Israeli history in and of itself. And as a side note, and I think it's important to mention that it's quite uncommon for commissions of inquiry to undertake this kind of historical investigations. Most commissions of inquiry, Israeli and non-Israeli alike, like to tend to depoliticize their investigations, to present them as specific events, almost accidents that took place on a certain day and that the state should learn from in order to make sure that these kinds of events will not repeat in the future. According to the Or Commission, the October 2000 events were basically the results of two main reasons. First, historical, social, and economic reasons. More specifically, according to the Commission, Israeli governments mishandled the Arab sector for decades. They discriminated the Arab sector and marginalized it. And that led to a series of social processes, for example, for poverty, unemployment, shortage of land, and other processes. That was the basis, that was the background that allowed the violence to erupt in October 2000. What was missing was some immediate reasons. For example, Sharon's visit to the Temple Mount, Harm el-Sharif, in late September 2000, or incitement to violence by Arab leaders, Dr. Azmi Bshara, Sheikh Raed Salah, the leader of the northern branch of the Islamic movement in Israel, Abd el-Malik Jahamshe, and others. According to the Commission, the events, the October 2000 events, were in fact predictable. It was just a matter of time. Now, on this basis, the Commission made a series of recommendations that could be divided into three kinds: individual recommendations, institutional ones, and general ones. Individual recommendations: during the investigation, the Commission issued a relatively long list of warnings against individuals who took part in the events in one way or another, and according to the Commission, the investigation could harm them, affect them negatively in one way or another. When it comes to actual recommendations, the commissions did not make so many personal recommendations. I'll get back to this point later because it is important to the point that I'm trying to make. Two additional kinds of recommendations were institutional ones. For example, how the Israeli police should prepare itself for future events in the future, and general recommendations regarding the way the state should treat the Arab sector to be more sensitive to the special needs of the Arab minority and to increase equality between Jews and Arabs in Israel and things like that. Retrospectively, according to the commissioners themselves, in speeches and lectures they gave a few years after the commission completed its work, the actual goal of the commission was, as Justice Orr, the chairman of the commission, put it, was to find a solution to the disputes and confrontations between a majority and a minority, between Jews and Arabs in this land, unquote. Or as Commissioner Judge Hashem Khatib put it, the Orr Commission determined that the main objective of state action must be to achieve genuine equality for the state's Arab citizens. And this is, to say the least, quite ambitious for an ad hoc body such as a state commission of inquiry that three members, three individuals. But what is more important for us today, I think, is the fact that in this thick dissertation, the whole report is quite long, it's 2 volumes, almost 800 pages. At the end of this report, the Commission actually touches on the importance of history and narratives. And I would like to read a few lines from the report. This is a quote that demonstrates this point. Coexistence is not easily achieved. It introduces hard demands and challenges for both sides. It requires listening to the other to understand his sensitivities and respect his basic rights. The Arab citizens of Israel should remember that Israel constitutes for Jewish Israeli citizens the realization of the Jewish people for a country of its own, a state in which Jews are the majority and that the ingathering of exiles is one of its essences. They should remember that the Jewishness of the state is a constitutional given that comes to fruition with, among other things, the centrality of Jewish heritage and Hebrew language in Israel's public life. The Jewish majority, however, should remember that the state is not only Jewish, but also democratic, that equality is one of the fundamental features of the state's constitutional structure, and that no citizen should be discriminated against. It should understand that the events that turned the Arabs into a minority in the state were for them a national catastrophe, and that their integration in Israel required a painful process by its victims. The Jewish majority must respect the identity, culture, and language of Arab citizens. It may be that the time has come to also express in Israel's public life the common denominator shared by all its citizens by adding national events and symbols in Hebrew, אירועים וסמלים ממלכתיים, that all citizens could identify with. It is appropriate to find ways to strengthen the attachment of Arab citizens to the state without diminishing their belonging to their own culture and community, unquote. In other words, one of the things that the Commission was trying to do was to reconstruct, to challenge the 1948 paradigm, which is the policy guidelines adopted early in 1948 by the state regarding the Arabs who remained in the Green Line, those who became Israeli citizens. A paradigm that was based on 2 opposed considerations. One that reflected the Jewishness of the state and security orientation, in other words, that saw the Arab minority as a potential 5th column, and a second consideration which represented more liberal and democratic features, enhancing integration and Israelization of Arab citizens in Israeli society. Now, in the interest of time, I won't say much about this slide, but the last 15 years, Israeli politics of the last 15 years goes in a totally different direction. It's true for the Jewish majority, the elite of the political elite, and it's also true for the Arab leadership. According to sociologist Sami Adwam from the University of Haifa, the decade between 2003 2012 was basically the lost decade in the relations between Jews and Arabs. The attitude of both of them toward each other just go harder and harder. And in the interest of time, I'll skip some details that I think demonstrate that. All in all, I think that the OR Commission was in fact ambitious and probably over-ambitious. It was unsuccessful in mobilizing change. And the reason, the question is why. And I will suggest 4 main reasons. There are probably more, but I will touch only on 4 of them. First, it was too slow. The events took place in October 2000. The Commission undertook its investigation. It took it almost 3 years. That's a very long time in Israeli politics. It's almost an eternity. Most of the protagonists of the events were in totally different places, assumed totally different positions. People don't see the connection. Prime Minister Barak retired from politics. Ariel Sharon was now the Prime Minister. And in fact, 2003 was the heyday of the Intifada. Basically a war, ongoing war. And now to take responsibility, the notion that Israelis should take responsibilities on their own actions not necessarily speaks to Israelis. This is one. Second, the report is too academic. The events were as Yediot Achronot, I think, was able to encapsulate the idea, there is an intifada. The context is quite clear. It's not necessarily about the attitude of Israeli governments over the years. It's about a large minority that identifies with the enemy. I guess that's the rule. Third, a lack of specifics. The Commission prescribes what to do, but not how to do it. How to mediate between this tension between the democratic nature of Israel and its Jewishness. There are different models to do that, but how to do it, that's a huge suffer. 1 minute and I'm done. And the last point, which is, I think, the most important one. The Commission suffered from legitimacy from top down and from below. And I can say that on the basis on extensive research that I did on Israeli commissions of inquiry and also on non-Israeli ones. Commissions need support to mobilize change. That's absolutely not what happened here. We have empirical evidence from 2016 that there is a positive correlation between the level of criticism contained in an Israeli inquiry report on the one hand and the level of public trust in the report on the other hand. In other words, the more critical an inquiry report is against office holders, the more reliable it appears to be in the eyes of Israeli citizens. I mentioned earlier that the Commission issued a very long list of warnings when it comes to actual punishment. It didn't do much. And from both the point of view of Jews and Arabs, both sectors believed that the Commission actually did not fulfill its work, and they lost their audience. And that's basically the point. Thank you very much.
So this is the title of my presentation, How School Books Legitimate Distancing, Exclusion, and Killing of Palestinians. The study is based on my previous research that appeared in this book, 2012, and another project which I started and which is temporarily called From Holocaust Education to Peace Education. The theoretical ground of such a study is multidisciplinary. I took the principles of inquiry from social semiotics, which means that we look at every sign, whether visual or verbal or layout or whatever, as motivated by ideology and interest. And then studies that help to decipher and to explain what happens in various books. The question I asked, followed by Frantz Fanon, was how are the oppressors educated? Now, the function of school books all over the world is not so much to relate accurate facts as to turn reality into a version of this reality by recontextualizing it to education. And to create a usable past for the future citizens to live by. Israeli school books are meant to legitimate the Zionist project of conquest and settlements, both to Jewish and Arab Israeli students. Israel never had an official peace education and never encouraged any common existence or joint life between Palestinians and Jews. When I say legitimation, I took the definition of Martin Rojo and Van Dyck. It means attributing acceptability to controversial social actors or social action within the normative order. Now, school books in Israel are a private industry. There are hundreds of them. Everyone can write a book, but they all have to be authorized by the ministry. Therefore, they must have an ideological common ground, which is made of certain assumptions that are not given to discussion. First of all, what exists? So in Israel, in Israeli school books, anti-Semitism, Jewish historical rights on the land of Israel and Palestine, and the fact that Israel's Arabs abandoned their villages. This is how Palestinians are called. Another source of assumption, our propositional assumption, what can or will be the case. Palestinian citizens constitute a demographic problem, which can become, and I quote from the books, demographic threat and demographic nightmare. And Palestinian non-citizens in the occupied territories are seen as Philistines, bloodthirsty, war-mongering terrorists, no matter what age they are. And the last sort of assumption is what's called value assumption. What is good and desirable? Jewish state, Jewish majority, and Israeli control. You don't discuss that. Now, how do you keep a Jewish majority? What do you do with all the others? So what you do in Israel is what Zygmunt Bauman defined as the gardening metaphor. In order to build an artificial society, such as the Israeli one, you cut out the elements that don't fit in, and you cultivate and mold the elements that can fit in. So in Israel, there are two types of others. There are Jewish and non-Arab and non-Jewish others that can be molded and transformed into what the state wants. They go through a symbolic and cultural elimination. For example, Jews from other countries, especially Arab countries, have to give up the language, the culture, their customs, and so on. The other type of others are the Arab-Palestinian others that cannot be changed and can never fit in our society, and they are treated as a race. And they undergo symbolic, cultural, and physical elimination. Here's an example from a geography school book where they show you something, I think, about ages. But the title is Jewish versus Arab Population in Israel. And as you see on the top diagram, it says Jews and others, and on the bottom one, Arabs. So who are the others? The book doesn't say, but exactly these other who are not Jewish, but they are not Arab, so they can belong with us. Now, Palestinian citizens, as we just heard, live in a constant state of exception, which means they are discriminated by law. But Palestinians in the territories live in what is called homo sacer, or bare life, which means that their existence is defined only by their exclusion, and they are constantly exposed to violence. And what does that mean? Today in Israel, it means that you can incarcerate children, lynch them, execute them, burn them, and all this with total impunity. For example, this little girl was arrested for 45 days for allegedly having a knife in her school bag. This is what she looked like after 45 days without meeting her parents or anyone. Children who allegedly had knives were executed in the streets. People took it as a normal thing. Whole families burned. A child with a knife lynched. And then, against all international laws, handcuffed to his bed in Hadassah Hospital, and then sentenced to 12 years in prison. Other children would not undergo the same process. How do you legitimate all this in textbooks? So first of all, by abstraction. You turn these people into abstract entities. And when you turn people into abstract, moral and ethical rules do not interfere. Okay, so you can handle them rationally. Palestinians in Israeli school books are presented as problems. Refugee problem, developmental problem, demographic problem, security problem. For example, this is in one of the books, two of the books, the Palestinian problem. As you see, there's nothing Palestinian about it. There are no people here. It's an ecological problem. Maybe they have mosquitoes or something, but this is defined as the Palestinian problem. This problem is self-directed phenomena. It acts by itself. For example, in the book, in the same book, the Palestinian problem would poison for more than a generation the relationships of Israel with the Arab world and with the international community. When you show where Palestinians live, you show it from high above, so you don't see people. This is Jabalia, and the only thing we know about it is overcrowdedness and poverty and poor hygiene and education. Theo van Leuven, one of the greatest scholars about textbooks and semiotician, says this is the angle of the pilot who flies too high to be able to see the people on whom he is dropping the bombs. And it is the kind of objective knowledge which education is still primarily concerned to reproduce. If the camera were a little bit lower, we would have seen things that Israeli education or media doesn't want you to see, like this or like this. In one of the books, not many, but very few, talk about checkpoints. As you see this checkpoint, it is empty of the people against whom it was erected. Okay? You see a few soldiers there drinking coffee. And here this Winnie the Pooh owl explains to you the importance of administrative detention, everything theoretical, abstract. And this enables the book to ask the children abstract questions by the criterion of utility. Okay, what is the purpose of the checkpoint? How does it represent our defensive democracy? Give one advantage and one disadvantage of administrative detention. Very theoretical, very abstract. Of course, the books will never have this kind of picture, which is a regular picture of a checkpoint every morning, or the meaning of administrative detention. As I said, the highest value is a Jewish majority, so this majoritarianism and the fear of minorities legitimate boundary drawing. Okay, since they are so dangerous and such a problem, we have to confine them and distance them from us. We don't want to be close to them. And one of the books, civic study book, tells you that being democracy and being exclusionary and segregational is no contradiction. Okay, there is no contradiction, it says, between the fact that Israel is comprised of a civil nation of citizens and the fact that several ethnocultural minorities live in it, but the only nation that enjoys self-determination is the Jewish one. This kind of phrasing, this kind of assertion does not leave any room for discussion or for refuting or for doubting the information in the book. Besides, says another book, minorities must accept their lot. It's very hard for them, of course, but they have to do it. And besides, same book, no, the book before, they are to blame. When you go to war, you cannot lament your defeat. Or the Arabs brought it upon themselves, as we heard before, for they fought the Jews to perdition. Now, the reasons for expelling or distancing or confining Arab citizens, Palestinian citizens, is always for our advantage, all right? We must preserve the national land and protect it from illegal invasion by the non-Jewish population. This non-Jewish population are citizens, okay? But they are presented in the school books as the enemy from within. The best way to exclude visually people is, of course, by maps, by what is called in geography, geographic or toponymic silence. This map, as you see, is a map of Arab population in Israel. And you see several concentrations of Arab citizens. And if you know Hebrew, you can look at the map after that. There is not even one Arab city depicted on the map, including Nazareth and Acre. All the cities are Jewish cities, so the impression is that they are encroaching on us. They live on us. And if you see here in Tel Aviv, Jaffa, they're actually pushing us to this sea, right? Now, this area is blank, and the legend says it's an area for which we have no data. Maybe there are no people there. It looks empty for us to settle, of course. Some books also use mental maps to explain discrimination of Arab citizens. Like this one, Arab villages are far from the center, the roads to them are difficult, and they have remained out of the process of change and development. They are hardly exposed to modern life, and there are difficulties to connect them to the electricity and water. Now, just remember that Israel is smaller than Los Angeles County, all right? So where exactly are they, these remote villages? Third phase. Since we have to confine them, then we have to control them, okay? So these civic studies tell you the military government helped the Jewish settlement all over the country and prevented Arab seizure of vacant lands. Vacant lands, of course, are the lands that were confiscated from them. Majoritarianism and the fear of minorities legitimate distancing through racist laws. For example, the law of citizenship, which doesn't allow a couple of Palestinians, one of whom is Israeli, one of whom is from the territories, to live together. So there are thousands and thousands of children who don't even go to school because they don't know where they belong. How does the book legitimate such a thing? They say some defend it in the name of Israel defensive democracy. We don't want terrorism. Okay. And some defend it for national reason to keep the Jewish character of the state. The book even mentioned that the Supreme Court ruled out that this law is unconstitutional, but of course we don't have a constitution. They live in a state of exception, and here is a quote from Carl Schmitt, in which the sovereign can decide whatever he wants to do at any point. Okay, majoritarianism, legitimate ethnic cleansing. For example, in this book, from a Jewish point of view, Plan D was a great success, strengthened the military power of the Jewish community, created the Jewish territorial sequence as a strategic asset, and this is good. When you want to legitimate expulsion, exclusion, discrimination, you must present these people as lesser human beings, as an inferior race. So Israeli school books use a lot racist discourse. For example, they present the negative qualities of this one homogeneous group, which are the Israel's Arabs, as if it's in their blood. The Arab society is traditional and objects to changes by its nature, reluctant to adopt novelties. Modernization seems dangerous to them. They are unwilling to give anything for the general good. The only representations of Arab citizens in Israeli books are this, what we call the Oxfam image of the third world, and this racist icon of an Alibaba. You never see a doctor, a teacher, or something like that. So of course, all these things make it very easy to legitimate killing. For example, this book, The Escape of the Arabs Following the Deir Yassin Massacre, solved a terrifying demographic problem, and even a moderate person such as the first President Weizmann called it a miracle. Why they actually have to die is very technical, like we know from Gaza 2014. We told them to leave, they didn't leave. So here, for example, the loudspeaker encouraging them to leave didn't work, so they had to die, or the soldiers did not know the people were hiding in their homes that night. The most important thing are the effects for us. Slaughter of innocent Palestinians in their home brought some confidence to Jews and restored the moral and dignity of the army. And then you can ask these rationalized questions. 50 Egyptians were killed, 40 were taken prisoners. In what way can such headline influence the morale of Israeli citizens? Do you think the reprisals were enough to deter the Arabs from acting against us, or do you want to kill more? Usually, after reports about massacres, we have an appraisal of the killer, and this is very important. Peter Berg talks about it, because they want to emphasize that what we do has nothing to do with who we are. So here, for example, the soldiers were endowed with extraordinary courage, improvisation, perseverance, tenacity, loyalty to wounded friends, and became the myth of Israeli soldiers. Always a wonderful picture of the killers. Look how wonderful, and Ariel Sharon here, and very known people. They look erect and beautiful and clean, and they protect us from this Arab. So the overall claim of reports about massacre is positive outcome for us, may condone or overlook evil done to them. Now David asked me to say something about what do I think how can we go on? So first of all, I would think this official version of history, which does not include the Nakba as the most major event in both narratives, does not create a usable past for us if we want to move beyond the narrative of the other. Okay? The victor's biased narrative should be deconstructed and reconstructed so as to include the histories of all groups, learned mostly from stories, poetry, art, and so on, and not from history books. Israeli discourse should be cleared of majoritarianism, the fear of minorities, which are both Jewish and Arabs, and of the ideal of racial white European Jewish purity, which all lead to the gardening of an artificial settler colonial society. If we really want to move from this Holocaust education to peace education, we must reintegrate the all but erased history of Jews in Arab countries and learn about the Palestinians in Palestine during that time, because by negating the life of Jews in exile, we also negate the life of Palestinians in Palestine at the same time. And last but not least, although I didn't mention it, change the meaning of never again from a traumatizing Holocaust education, adoration of power and revenge which is taken on the Palestinians, that leads to xenophobia and belligerence, into learning about the role of racism and nationalism in ethnic cleansing and genocide. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the presenters. I now welcome up our three respondents who each have 10 minutes. They are Sheila Katz, a professor of Middle East history and contemplative studies at Berklee College of Music, Marco Silber, a senior lecturer at the Department of Jewish History at the University of Haifa, and Mahmoud Yazbak, a lecturer of Palestinian social history at the University of Haifa. I invite you all to the table, and then we will again shift chairs and have our speakers return for questions and conversation.
So I want to thank all the panelists for their thoughtful detailing of dual and dueling narratives. You have exposed, in many ways that school texts, educational systems, justice systems, and cultural representations mythologize history, rationalize inequality, and necessitate violence. Samira and Nurit skillfully show the power of textbooks to select and omit information that distorts pupils' own identity and that of the other, preparing young people to perpetuate occupation, terror, and dehumanization. Nadav points out that the Orr Commission recommended precisely the opposite path to a shared future. For Palestinians to achieve genuine equality, there must be mutual and formal recognition of the other's past, each learning the other's history. Arnon pointed out that Zionist narratives in history have included awareness of the Palestinian reality or story, and he emphasizes the unsustainability of a future for Israel based on ever-deepening Palestinian subordination. Each panelist destroys fallacies that, in Arnon's words, quote, make it more difficult for Jews, and I would add Palestinians, to recognize the common humanity and common love of country that both Israelis and Palestinians possess. So my first book, that was entitled Women and Gender in Early Jewish and Palestinian Nationalism, begins with the line, "The way we tell the stories of our past have life and death consequences." Both our national movements and narratives arose from the effort to avoid being wiped out as a people on the land, yet together both managed to make us, both the narratives and the movements, to make us and the other act precisely in ways that reproduce danger. But Palestinians and Israelis have been working together to transcend their seemingly irreconcilable accounts of the past in ways that we might call, for the purposes of this conference, a third narrative, but maybe closer to what David mentioned earlier, which is multiple narratives, that arise out of transformative encounters with the other and the other's history. I watched the formation of this third narrative that I didn't call then, I didn't know what that was, when I spent 5 years in Israel back in the 70s, bringing Palestinians from Israel, the West Bank and Gaza, together with Israelis through co-counseling, a network that I founded there. And it facilitated listening to the other's personal stories for the first time. They learned firsthand of the other's suffering and dignity, shattered stereotypes, exposed inequality, and cultivated a sense of respect and responsibility for the other. Decades later, as a historian, I wondered why people then were willing to risk their lives to do this often dangerous work together. My research assistant was a young Palestinian undergrad at Brandeis. She had grown up in then communist Nazareth and taken for granted participation in joint groups. So of course it didn't take long to discover that my work there and the handful of other initiatives I worked with, including Nebi Shalom, Wahat Salam, when it was a deserted hilltop with a tin shack, Partnership, Interns for Peace, and the Gypsies, if anybody noticed the crazy traveling street theater. It was the year of the election where Begin won, but before that, so we had tomatoes thrown at us. That it was part of a much longer, complicated history of Palestinian-Israeli joint nonviolent initiatives that began at the turn of the 20th century, during Ottoman times, as two new national movements took root. What was most remarkable to me, and gives me hope now, is that in every era, after each devastating catastrophe, World War I, the Palestinian Revolt, World War II, the partition with Israeli independence and the Nakba, the Cold War, the Arab-Israeli wars, Palestinians and Israelis reinvented joint initiatives in new forms to meet ever-changing conditions. That is the subject of my new book that came out on Election Day last November, called Connecting with the Enemy, A Century of Palestinian-Israeli Joint Nonviolence. It's a sweeping chronology of this joint work throughout history, and it contains only over 500 initiatives, which is a fraction of what was created together. So I also have a website now with links to 250 initiatives, and ways for people to submit additional ones that got left out of the book or formed after 2010, when the narrative ends. So I know somewhat firsthand how hard it can be on a daily level on the front lines of this grassroots work, or as Sami said, from the bottom up. And I hope that this broad perspective will help give strength to the work with a bigger perspective. The breadth, the diversity, and the scope of the work, when seen from a historical perspective, including obstacles to its success, illuminate an extraordinary achievement of ordinary Palestinians and Israelis. Over 15% of the 500 groups in the book are in the field of education, both formal and informal, including Sami Adwam's work with Prime. And you know the others. I'm sure you know many of them, like the Van Leer Institute in the 1980s that launched a nationwide education program on Arab-Jewish relations to produce 20 textbooks and train 2,000 teachers to address imbalances of power. And the creation of integrated schools like Hagar, the Arabic language program Ya Salam that reached 23,000 Israeli pupils, and how researchers found that these pupils did not respond to the Gaza war with habitual racism that was widespread among their peers. Education about the other's narrative is a component of almost all the Palestinian-Israeli joint nonviolent initiatives in all fields, including in the arts, environmental activism, civil society, human rights, and democracy, community activism, dialogue, political activism, business ventures, religious activism, communications, women's activism, science, medicine, mental health, and sports. To my knowledge, there has never been such a sustained and persistent attempt to connect with an enemy in so many wildly diverse and courageous ways by so many thousands of people in so many different fields. Arnon mentioned that Zionists who transcended their national narratives through recognition, he showed us some Zionists who transcended their national narratives through recognition of Palestinian needs and goals. So I want to close with two of the many, many Palestinians who, in Arnon's words, quote, transcend their narrative and contribute to this third narrative, or this multivocal narrative. The activist scholar Mohammed Abu Nimr said that the most important thing he learned in dialogue with Israelis was to question his own national narrative. He said that encounters can inoculate participants against indoctrination with their own side's ideology. If they argue only one side of the story, they fail. But they can help one to, quote, develop more self-critique, the kind that tortures you in a conflict situation. You want to believe that you are on the right side, But through the work of peace building, you come to see that you need and depend on the other to get anywhere in resolving the conflict. Paradoxically, the dual narrative project accomplishes this through separate narratives by working together on them. The activist poet Mahmoud Darwish wrote, "It's impossible for me to evade the place that Israelis have occupied in my identity. Israelis change the Palestinians and vice versa. Israelis are not the same people that came. Palestinians are not the same people that once were. In one, there is the other. The other is a responsibility and a test. Together, we are doing something new in history. Will a third way emerge?"
A dual narrative, dual narratives, or multiple narratives. It seems to me that this panel is inspired by the book Learning the Other's Historical Narrative by Sami Adwam and the late Dan Bar-On. From the vagueness of my memory, I recall a two-columns page, one column with the so-called Zionist narrative, the second with the so-called Palestinian one. The space in the middle was left open for comments of the potential pupil. I remember that I thought to myself, what an interesting initiative. It offers the possibility to the reader to include his personal narrative into a collective story. It offers the possibility to create multiple narratives, collective and individual. Listening to these panels, afar of time and space, that text seems to me like a mirage. In a panel called Challenges and Potential of a Dual Historical Narrative, the issue of simultaneously representing two collective narratives was addressed only marginally. Nadav Molchavsky discussed the or commissioned attempts to reconcile Israeli Jews and Israeli Palestinians. He points out to the legal tool's failure to promote mutual understanding between the Jewish majority and the Palestinian minority in Israel, and to acknowledge different historical narratives. According to his presentation, this legal attempt to enhance acknowledgement of the other's past and the contradicting narratives failed to create discursive spaces helping us to achieve genuine equality for the state's Arab citizens. In his presentation, it seems to me that he is already framing the status and power relation of the narratives, locating Jews at the center and Arabs at their emergence. And these attempts gained in the public sphere the opposite results to those desired. Arnold Ghani challenged essentialist approaches to the conflicts. Arnold addressed indirectly the question of a dual historical narrative. He doesn't focus on the question of a dual narrative, meaning Zionist and Palestinian, but concentrates instead upon a dual internal narrative, meaning relations to, I quote, some Zionist sensibilities or even identification with a Palestine narrative, a Palestine narrative, the Palestine narrative, end quote. He proposed a more nuanced and empathic Zionist narrative, one more attentive to Palestinian suffering, recovering, so to speak, the point of view of Dayan's ideology of 1956. It seems to me that this is not, but if we try to implement his suggestion into the frame of a dual historical narrative, as our panel suggests, it means to transform or at least to add lost traditions of Zionist identification with the Palestinian propositions to hegemonic Zionist discourse. Doing that, it seems that dual means adding Zionist voices and Zionist points of view to the hegemonic Zionist narrative. An important initiative to awake this historical early Zionist empathy to the Palestinian. But in any case, it confronts the issue from the point of view of the Zionist Jewish Hebrew majority, more nuanced, but still the hegemonic ethno-national majority kept in ethno-national paradigms. Both presentations of Samira Alayan and Nurit Peled El-Hanan focus on textbooks, while Alayan focused on Palestinian textbooks or Arab books used in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. Peled El-Hanan dealt with Hebrew textbooks for use of the ethno-national Jewish majority in Israeli state schools, Mamlachti. However, Samira and Nurit described Hebrew and Palestinian school books as essentially different. Nurit presented Hebrew books as superpowers in creating racist citizens, disregarding international laws and decisions, looking ahead of injustice. Samira presented the Palestinian books as powerless and freedomless, emphasizing both the lack of symmetry. But at the same time, both have many similarities. Both emphasize the importance of school texts, both presentations emphasize the importance of school textbooks in shaping identities, but concluding that it therefore merely legitimizes the regime's point of view, whatever it is, strengthening the hegemonic ethno-national paradigm. Both relate to indoctrinary efforts of state bureaucrats and politicians to influence school children and youth, and the state anxiety regarding a critical or balanced approach to their national projects. Both presentations show the two cases of we against they. Both describe how historical narrative is used to legitimize each one's national claims, presenting the own national cause as a result of justice and belonging, while the others is presented as intrusive and illegitimate, as also arose from the introductory words by Sami Adwam. Consequently, both minimize or even ignore central aspects of the other historical narrative, a central point when discussing challenges awakened when introducing dual narratives. Moreover, keeping the nationalistic narratives, both talk about the nation in essentialist terms rather than discussing nation building as socially constructed, or of the process of construction, the national identity. Both sets of books seems to disregard individuals' dilemmas, individuals' responses against the big processes, or even individuals' tragedies, or how individuals confronted them at the margins of the big processes. From both presentations arose that both sets of books do not see individuals, or at least do not see them more than mere simple illustrations. It seems to me that this is not only the problem of the textbooks, it is also the problem how we scholars address them. According to the presentations, we could think that books present, indoctrinize, convince completely and consequently. The reader have limited space to be critical, absorbing the textbook narrative passively. In both cases, the semiotic level is presented as an effective tool. In the case of Nurit, the language is presented literally as crime-provoking. The blank in the censored books in Samira's case is presented as silence. This perspective is clearly a top-down perspective. The reader seems to be missing. We lack research on how books are worked through in schools and homes. Besides the readers, the teachers' approaches are also missing from the analysis. The teachers are those who are mediating the text for their pupils, and their approach in the class mediates the way the text is read and interpreted. Tom Lighthouse will present his paper in the fourth session of this conference, a paper that I had the privilege to read a few days ago. He will present a case that suggests that for better or worse, teachers' texts hadn't changed much the ways pupils think or feel. It seems to me that would be the case of the textbooks analyzed here. Following that, I would like to suggest that the reader is the one who makes the Hebrew textbooks less powerful than appears in Nurit's case, and the Palestinian much more powerful than presented in Samira's paper. I am sure that in the classroom, the teachers in East Jerusalem know how to fill the text deleted by the censor, filling the blanks with powerful meaning. It could be interesting to try to understand how the experience of filling up the blank would shape the pupil's experience while learning a certain topic. In any case, what I try to suggest is that the process of agency and thought-provoking are less dependent on books than what could be understood from the presentations. As we all knew, a text could be read in different ways. For the sake of our discussion, we could take slide 67 in Nurit's presentation, which shows a page of a textbook she analyzes. From the slides, it seems that it takes for granted that the reader, either teacher or pupil, will only internalize the mythization of the killers, as Nurit stated, minimizing the idea of reader agency and even the idea of individual agency. But when reading the same page presented in the slide, we could see the option of reading it subversive. For instance, regarding the massacre of Kibia in 1953, the text from the book photographed in the slide read, also in Israel a public debate arose regarding its justification. That of course would open a classroom debate. In the same page, we're dealing with many Palestinian attempts to return from Gaza. The text reads, only a few of them were Fedayeen infiltration. Most of them were people's attempts to return to their villages. In a sensitive classroom, with teachers aware of the multiple voices and the multiple historical processes and their different interpretations, this statement would open a discussion about the Nakba, or at least about the individual's tragedy. I am not only taking this example to suggest that the picture is not so black and white, composed only by heroes and villains, as would be understood from Nurit's presentation, but also to emphasize the space of the teacher to open discussion, being agents of change or perpetuating conflict. Moreover, I would like to emphasize the place, the place of the reader, even the younger ones, to interpret. That the last paragraph. That brings us to the big absent in this discussion. The pupils, the reader, high school and young adolescents that are often critical and skeptic regarding what is going on within the classrooms. There are 21st century postmodern adolescents that challenge our discourse in class with information from Wikipedia or other authoritative sources. In any case, it seems to me that the textbooks are not the exclusive source of truthful information for adolescents, for better and worse. So many questions remain unanswered when dealing with challenges and potential of a dual or multiple historical narratives. First, the text's narratives and readers' interpretations. Second is the concept of duality or multiple voices, adding voices to the hegemonic voice of each side. Is dual meaning referring to a formal recognition of others' points of view, meaning the point of view of the other side, presenting it as a mere point of reference? Last, when talking about dual narratives, multiple narratives, we should ask if it means to focus exclusively on the top-down big processes, emphasizing our narratives versus theirs, or also incorporating, as Sami Adwam suggested, or also incorporating a bottom-up perspective, presenting individuals like Lima, emphasizing the individual experience and the different individuals' way to confront the tragedies. Thank you.
So, Marcus has asked a question before he finished about the reader. I want to start from here. I was the reader. I was the reader as a Palestinian called citizen of Israel. Sometimes they would call me Israeli-Palestinians, and sometimes Israeli-Arab, whatever. I am Palestinian. Now, when I have been child and looked into the books and studied in the my history according to Israeli curricula, because I studied in Nazareth, and Nazareth is an Israeli occupied or part of Israel, I didn't study even one word about Palestine. It's not existing. Of course, Palestinians were not existing too. But did I study about my history? Of course, yes. Not at the classroom, never. At the classroom in my home, my father, my mother, my uncle, everybody. But they have taught me the history that they wanted me to know. And this is a big difference. That means everybody would teach a history according to his knowledge, to the family knowledge. And this is very dangerous thing because, you know, there is no institution to teach you history. That means I ask myself all the time, what did the government of Israel wanted of me? What they wanted me, what to do? To know about the Holocaust, I knew every word. Of course, yeah, really, and I respected that very much. To know about the Jewish history during the Rome occupation, I knew everything. About the geography of India, we had full book, and other geographies, but not the geography of Palestine at all. And even not a word about Palestinian names of villages or towns, even my town where I am living, Nazareth, and it's a holy place, everybody knows that. However, this is, we started we learned such a history, but then the produce, which they produced in the schools, it's me, my personality. To say today and every day, as I do tell my students in the University of Haifa and other places, I am Palestinian and I'm proud of being Palestinian. This is a very important thing. And then I start my class to tell my students the history according to my understanding. Well, we had, I want to start with Nurit's presentation. Of course, we had here, at least at the end, she presented the Israeli part, the Jewish part. There's, until our days, 67, 68, 70 years after the establishment of the State of Israel, when you look at the history books that are taught now, you will not much find difference between what I have thought, what they had taught me during the 60s, early 70s, and what they are doing today. That means we still have now two kind of citizens, two kind of educational systems. One wants to have a Jewish one, which is not, I don't know whether to call it Israel or not, because at the end, Palestinian who is living in Israel as a citizen deserves to have something by the state to be taught as history. So we will, until today, have two different citizens. One is called Israeli Jew, and of course, according to what we see, is much more higher than the other one, which is the Palestinian. So also looking into Samira's presentation. Of course, it's very accepted, but you see, it's very a strong way to bring to the student in Eastern Jerusalem, as you said, Marcus, blank pages. So who will fill that? It's very clear who will fill that. Everybody will fill it according to his understanding. So really, I think the government of Israel missing a very important point here by bringing to the students blank papers, blank sheets. If there is a real government to govern or real education administration, they wouldn't do such a game. It's a very lost game. However, let's go back to Arnon Dagani. Of course, Arnon, as an ex-student of mine, I am very proud of what you have done today. It's really very fantastic, it was. And to see, because the time is so, I want to go, you see, after 1967, just in 2-3 minutes. After 1967, Israel have become an empire in a sudden. And this empire have made much good thing, of course, not initially, with the Palestinians. Between 1948 and 1967 and 1966, Palestinians were under a military regime. Suddenly, Palestinians in Israel have become much more important, let us say, citizens than others. And if you look about number of students who had studied in the university from 1948 until 1967, you would find that all of these years, citizens of Israel, Palestinian citizens of Israel, have studied not more than 50 persons, 50 students who have went to universities in Israel. Suddenly, after 1967, the number started to rocketing. Why is that? Because the economic situation of the Palestinians in Israel started to become much more important because the new empire of Israel wanted to build up new borders. So they wanted the new workers to work for building up the new borders, and they didn't find else but us as Palestinians. So we had much more money, not more as under a military regime. We have much more money, so we can invest in our sons, in our pupils, in our families to become, to send them to the universities. In this case, the new situation has produced a new generation. But in the other side, when Israel has occupied the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, at that time, for me, the Palestinian territories, it reunified Palestinians and Israel with the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. And for a sudden, when you look what have been written between 1948 and 1967, you would find that almost there is nothing called something Palestinians. The word Palestinians was not used at all. Not only in school books, of course, also in the media, in the Israeli media. After 1967, this unification of two Palestinians have made the new citizens, which are very, very Palestinians. And this is a thing which now cannot be. But the new generation, even without teaching themselves that they are Palestinians, they have passed a Nakba catastrophe in 1948, they, of course, know every detail. And you want to have the proof for that, that they know every detail about that. Palestinians in Israel have produced some days, some national days, which we'll call it. One of these days, we call it the Return Day, Al-Awda Day, or the Nakba Day, which is the same day of the Israeli Independence Day. And last year, only 1 month ago, those who attended the Al-Awda Day and the Return Day would see tens of thousands of participants who came to the Al-Kabri, yeah, and these were in the ages between 17, 25, 26, most of them. Which means, and everybody had to come by his forces. Not there was no transportation or somebody to pay for you in order to come there. And you would see those tens of thousands of young people who come there and in order to fill themselves with the Palestinian identity, which Israel has failed to tell them who are they. So by the ignorance here that Israel have adopted, ignoring the other doesn't make the other ignore itself. Time's up.
Good afternoon. It's great having you for this afternoon session. This is our second session of the day. I am honored to be chairing this panel, and also I would like to thank David for inviting me to hear a lot of research that's going on in this field. And this session is titled Education in Israel. First of all, my name is Omar Boom. I am an associate professor of anthropology and also associated with NELC at UCLA. This session is titled Education in Israel and Palestine, Navigating the Educational Systems and the Case of the Prime Project. We have 2 speakers and 2 respondents. Each speaker has 20 minutes, and then after that we will give the floor to the respondents to respond in 10 minutes. But let me introduce all of the speakers and respondents at once. So the first speaker is Sami Adwam, is the co-director of Prime and an associate professor of education at the University of Bethlehem. Eyal Nave is co-director of Prime and a professor of US history at Tel Aviv University. For the respondents, we will hear from Sivan Sakai. He's an associate professor of education at the American Jewish University Graduate Center for Education. And Carlos Alberto Torres is a distinguished professor in social sciences and comparative education at UCLA. Please, let's first of all hear from Sami Adwam.
You know, I was thinking of, shifting my presentation based on what has been presented in the morning, and it's very interesting, but I would share some of that in my talk. But when we started the dual narrative, it is by choice, taken in the context where it has been developed. And when we started this project with all comments and criticism and challenges, we didn't think of that at all. We want to do something, we want to create something based on the research that done in the Palestinian-Israeli textbooks, that each side will only present his narrative, his opinion, and the other narrative is not there. It's absent, it's missing. So that's the idea. It's very basic, it's very simple. And we thought maybe, we started with the assumption dual narrative. But well, that's good to start, because now it's become part of the jargon among scientists and researchers, which we were proud of. I didn't know if somebody used to hear this before we started this project and become, now known all over the world. But that's in itself. But why we start with one dual narrative is a spring, point to depart from. Is basically in conflict situation, you assume that the other side has only one narrative. That's the assumption. But when you swift a little bit the surface, you find multi-layers of narrative that exists. And that's in itself by it. So that's one thing. The other thing is these narrative to present the Palestinian, the Israeli narrative? We said no. It could represent only part of the narrative that is narrated in each side. So it's not comprehensive, it's not final, it's only one part of that. But now it's been picked up, accordingly, and we move from dual narrative to multi-narrative. Of course, we discussed this. Should we also work on writing a joint narrative? And contextually, it's very difficult. Even in the Palestinian side, we cannot write joint narrative. In the Israeli side also, the same thing as was mentioned in the morning. So would we try to make bridging narrative? Bring pieces and pieces from here there. So we said also it's difficult. And then we decided that we want to have two narratives side by side. And when we said side by side, we don't want to evaluate or create a symmetry. We want to create symmetry on the places of narrative rather than, we don't want to elude people that the real life situation is symmetry. It's asymmetry, So that's that. Comparative from all aspects and from different perspectives. And when we started, to do that, this is basically, if this is the argument this is a prime for those who doesn't know prime. This is just basically Palestinian-Israeli NGO, started in 1998, based on the research that was done before. It's the attempt that jointly been constructed and built up jointly to work together in the light of creating understanding by both sides and through education and through work. Though prime as it stands also, we don't engage in politics, though what we do is very much politicized. We believe in two-state solution. And if you look at the Palestinian-Israeli context, family stories plays a significant role. Also, education plays a significant role in both society for different reasons. So that's how we started, how conflict during history during conflict, how history discipline is mainly dominated by political politics and political agenda. It's very controlled, and when you saw the presentation, Palestinian Ministry of Education control what goes in the textbooks, what's being taught, and also controlling the teacher training. In the Israeli side, none of these books could be put in the selection Fiyal can correct me maybe later, in a selection that school could choose unless it's pre-approved by the Ministry of Higher Education. With a special committee, they go by word, etc. So that's what, of course, informing identity. We can say that both sides, school textbooks without symmetry, trying to do symmetry thing, they really present the conflict in a different way, and they try to present themselves in relation to the others. So sometimes we ask ourselves, if the Palestinian-Israeli situation, conflict, occupation, and what will be, how we would see the future textbooks, because it's built in each other's. Basically, it's accusation. We are right, they are wrong textbooks. We always try to do peace. The other people didn't dare to do peace. We always, we always try to be nice. We are our heroes, they're monster, etc. But basically, those who dare to criticize school books in time of conflict, they be accused of less patriotic, less loyal, or even denial their ancestor, whatever. So the conclusion, which I said in the morning, there's no one history, and that's basic, and I can stand for this all the time because, history is seen as one story. It's mainly the political one perspective. No into history, that's what's mentioned in the morning. And also research has been proved that that's no one history. Though history in time of conflict is being filtered so much by the politics in what goes in, what's allowed to write, either general political or ideology, whatever you name it. As I said in the morning, there's so much responsibility. So this filter subjectivity of writing history, it's a phenomenon. It's not limited to the Palestinian-Israeli. If we ask about how the American deal with the Vietnam War, if the European deal with, the Vietnam War or the civil war in society, that's also, you can see it's dominated by one side than the other side. It is the assumption which is false. The other side has one narrative which is completely wrong. Why we choose narrative, not history? Whatever we deal about history and variety of history, whatever we look, if all of us look at the same screen and ask ourselves, what did we see? Everybody, we come 30%, maybe we share what we have seen, and 60, 70% is different. That's why we call history is what is filtered through inner subjectivity and what we remember from history. Of course, it's based in facts, but how you present the facts, in what context you present facts, how is like the pictures that was asked, if you show pictures, what angle, why you choose this event, not to choose the others, why you focus on this part of history, why you are not focusing on the other one. So this is what we are carrying is the narrative of the history, and that's why narrative is changing it during the course of your history. It doesn't stand still. It moves sometimes back and forth, but it's facts cannot be changed, but description of facts is different, And it's vividly seen when we look at, let's say, the Deir Yassin massacre, or we look at 1929 event or massacres in Hebron and of the Jews in Hebron. It's completely, there's fact. You can count numbers, you can count people, but at the same time, how these happened, I read in one Israeli textbooks that 117 people were killed in the course of action. So there's no mentioning. You don't know what's there. Also in Hebron, a massacre of Jews does not say much about that. So that's something. So in general, textbooks and history is to sustain conflict, to garner more support, to justify what went wrong, etc., and to defend, also to justify whatever. The same thing, that what history, what goes in the content of textbooks, and how teachers are trained. What goes in textbooks is really what has been pre-approved. There's no question about it, and teachers are really trained to teach their narrative in the way they were mandated. And those teachers, what happened with the teachers when we introduced this, those teachers who tried to deviate from that and enter into critics of their own historical narrative and we call it sometimes historical master narrative because it's become dominant, and we distinguish between personal narrative, group narrative, community narrative, the national narrative, the national master historical narrative, which is really the dominant one which we imposed in another. So when we look at the content, it's very clear, and that's research I did in early 90s, and it's still the same. I did another research with Danny Bartel, and the result came in 2013, is the same. It's still textbooks are presenting itself in a positive term, the other side in negative term, etc. Also teaching is the same thing. History teaching in conflict, that's a very good example. It's also in accumulating knowledge. Criticism of textbooks in classroom is allowed as far as it is within the general domain of political ideology. They can allow discussion, but as far as you don't cross border or boundaries of that's official approved these textbooks, role of teachers, etc. Our teachers were reprimanded. Some teachers were threatened to be punished because they use something that has not been pre-approved by the ministries. The pressure in the Israeli side came by the Ministry of Education. The pressure on the Palestinian side came from social political groups, normalization, giving space to the enemy narrative. All this accusation, and you can feel that. We talk about bottom-up versus top-down. There's no way to change the curricula statement, or there's no way to change also the, what's in the textbooks to ask the ministries, and this question was asked to Samir on this before. The ministries are really living in their nutshells. They don't listen. They don't care. If I have much time to talk to you about our result research, how the ministries refer to it is amazing. It's like they don't want to listen. They think they are all right. Gideon Sar, was so harsh on us as a researcher. Also, the Palestinian Ministry of Education, they just not denounce us, but they forget all about us. Also, agreement, why I say personal desires versus position and political ones. We have two examples, which is very vivid. Yuli Tamir was the Minister of Education in late 90s. Yeah, but Yuli Tamir. Okay. Okay, now, sorry, that's what. Yuli Tamir, when she looked at the Israeli school books, they didn't find the green line. And she raised this question, why there's no green line on the Israeli maps? And she became under complete fire by right and wrong, whatever, right people, whatever. And I think she gave up. Also, the Palestinian Minister of Education, Lamis Al-Alami, both happens to be female ministers, women, she wanted to introduce our books in Jericho school, 2 schools. And she became under extremely criticism. She has to face so many writing, accusation, etc. And she backed off. And I have her signature on a paper on my hand. I have it in my home. But she said, no, that's never been done. So this here we call how personal, position versus the collective one. I think one of the Palestinian teachers, I don't know if she allows me to mention her name, I can mention her name, Maysoon. One time she was asked, I don't know if she remembered, in Braunschweig, can't you change the definition of Zionism? And if I can quote you wrong, you can correct me, of course. She said, I have no problem with that. I can do that, but I have to get the approval. She mentioned 10 or 8 million Palestinians. Do they agree with me or not? So that's tells you, how much we are, manipulated by the systems. So this is a prime project. We thought about one joint project, one joint historical narrative, bridging narrative, dual narrative. We said it's too soon to do this. And we have to realize the context where we did our work. We started in 1998, but we ended up starting in 2001, and that's the start of the second Intifada, and it's really serious matters. Out there is life and death, where the teachers are coming to the meeting, they have to pass through different things. So we said, no way that we can do bridging narrative, no joint narrative, we have to do dual narrative approach, and that's how we went through it. Of course, that's one thing to say. It's no intention in our side that each side will start legitimizing the other side narrative, or deconstruct their own narrative, delegitimize it. It's only to get them to know that their different narrative exists. and that's different. So the reconciliation, we think in the long run could help reconciliation, and we don't know because sometimes education versus reality, education cannot do much versus the reality, and so there is no intention to try to, to deconstruct your narrative. That's the first, cover of the book. And if you look at it, we look at the process. And this is how we think that in people engaged in conflict look at each other. Very stereotypical, male-oriented, both recognize each other, they don't look at each other. The trees are, hopefully presenting the futures. But each side water his or garden, but his, we said his because that's stereotype. But we changed this after we got so much emphasis, but we now we can explain it. It's part of the process, how you start, and when you are exposed to the other side narrative, this is what could create a change. We've been accused, before we got to accuse, that's in the second introduction of our textbooks, are we really covering the Israeli narrative or the Palestinian narrative as a whole? I said, wow. That's a really big question. We try actually to open what we call it history to this, oh my God, history to discussions, but otherwise we close history. History should be open to discussion. That's why we put the middle space for people to create dual narrative, multi-narrative, 1,000 narratives, it's up to them. So we are pushing that responsibility to those who are. The process of engaging teacher is very important. It's a good choice. We had to start with teachers because, as was mentioned in the morning, even if you have the very good textbooks and the teacher don't buy in it, it doesn't matter. If it's bad textbooks and the teacher can do it, best out of it. But it's important to empower teachers, to give them a sense of authorship, empowerment, engagement. And we were successful to recruit 6 Palestinian, 6 Israeli teachers at the beginning. At the end, we have, 24, 36. But the teachers become mobilizer for our work. We started, to discuss narrative, how narrative is competing. When you ask people engaged in conflict, they choose events that support them. And we end up, after many discussions, to start with Balfour Declaration for 8 War, 1987, First Palestinian Intifada. That's the first book. Then we moved from other book. We got it. Then at the end, we have 9 chapters covering the historical narrative from 1900 to 2000. The process is not easy. To listen to the enemy, between bracket narrative, is one effect. To read the enemy narrative in your own languages, this is another challenge. Teachers, some of them brave enough to continue. Other teachers are brave enough to not being able to continue. They drop, they didn't come, that's fine. Because it's a lot of social psychology. It's really addressing your identity, where you are. And when we ask the teacher, would you be able to talk about what's going on in the meeting to your colleagues, to your spouses, to your, said, no, very hardly, very few they were able to talk about that. This is how, some of them they cry, some of them they want to withdraw, they shout, they cry, they scream, whatever you name it, because, to give up narrative or try to question the narrative that you grow up with, it's not an easy process. So classroom experience, the teacher will speak about it tomorrow, and we have, I think, short video we can show later in the afternoon if we stay. Teacher try to experience this, and the teacher experience is a very dynamic, and it's very important, and we find, effects is different from those who accept. It's nice to know the other narrative. No, now we know why they behave there. Other people have said, no, we shouldn't teach the other narratives. Completely propaganda, falsification of history, etc. It's our narrative is right, and yeah. But the one that we didn't foresee is those pupils who start learning this narrative, they start going back to their parents and ask them, we learned this, you told us this. How do you manage, what's your responses on that? We thought we achieved a lot. When we got the product, we felt very fearful what happened. Locally, we are not acceptable. We did not accept for different reasons. Internationally, it's become a very important outcome. They very much translate to Italian, then to French, then to Spanish, then to, of course, to English and Arabic. And it's spread all over, but locally, we are not really recognized. So that's to create a group of teachers who believe in that, to train them, to retrain them. It's one aspect. Always multi-narrative exists in a society. The model could be used in all conflict situations. Some people said, did you develop that in only serve in conflict era? No, it could serve in any situation, in conflict, pre-conflict, post-conflict, in any way. It's an issue to open up for multi-perspectivity. We won many prizes. Posing dilemma, we are not accepted by both society. Teachers, we don't have power to support them. If they are fired, we don't know what to do with them. We cannot offer them jobs. So what do you do? But at the same time, you know, we continue. How to deal with emotion is very important, by the way, aspects. Never being touched here and there, but you know, when you teach history, it's not only a dry, objective reality of content. It has emotion. When you talk about the Palestinian catastrophe, when you talk about the Palestinian, the Israeli independence, that's completely too emotional. Reality has its own effects. Peace building through, conflict is not a linear process. It goes ups and downs. It has its own challenges, very energy taking. The effect of such projects is slow but open up. But I think we are so much happy that this dual narrative approach, now we start all this discussion as we heard this morning and others. People start talking about multi-narrative, dual narrative, no, not one history, multi-perspective, etc. I just want to mention, this is the title, the final title, which you said, I think, I don't know, colleagues present that in the morning. This is completely different images. When you learn about the other side, you look at them, but still they are positioned in their, situation. I just want to give you just a few examples. This is Balfour Declaration, for example, how it's seen from both sides. You know, they call it opposite narrative, which is fine because a lot of discussion game. Should we write something that could be capsulized and accepted by other, or should we really present what's being taught as a startup in each society? If you look at the British mandate, my time is up. And if you look at the British mandate, this is how it's being seen by both sides. It's not, I'm sure you are familiar with that. If you look at peace, the places and the maps, as was mentioned by Samira and others, if you look at Palestinian refugees issues, the Israeli narrative, or they fled, they ran away. We asked them to stay, but the Palestinians said no, they were expelled. There's that planned Dalit, etc. So here, 1948 war, how it's been presented. Role of Arab countries, it's very important here, but it's been mentioned in completely different ways. 1964, the Israelis said it's preemptive war, the war is coming, so might as well to do. The Palestinians said no, it's an aggression war, it's pre-planned. First Intifada, which is very amazing, how it's been seen by both sides. And the Israelis said, 20 years of giving these people jobs, they don't appreciate it. They start writing. The Palestinians said, it's the first outcry of the Palestinians. They want their national identity. Oslo Agreement seen as a means or as an end. It is really completely important. The Palestinians said it should be a means that ends the occupation. The Israelis said, it's reduced what they call it, the attacks or the violence against Israel. That's fine. So that's, I rest my case here. Thank you.
Yeah, this is the first one. So I'm the co-founder of Prime, and I am a professor of history at Tel Aviv University in the last 30 years, doing American history and history education. And what I would like to do now is to supplement Sami's talk by giving you some framework of our work. You got the content, I think, you got the material. And now I would like to frame it into larger context, use a lot of images that at the end I think you'll be much more familiar with the challenge of our project and its limited success. I always call it a successful failure. And it will be divided to 6 chapters, and I'll skip it because Sami did some of the job. I'll try with the history of education and what does it mean. What does it mean, traditional history education? As you probably know, traditional history education is disseminating historical information, creating historical knowledge, and inculcating historical literacy and historical consciousness as an essential part of constructing collective identity. Obviously, you always choose an agreed upon and approved narrative because you always process of selection. We already witnessed it in the morning. But as we did in the morning, there's a lot of realms and a lot of context of history education. Yes, one is the official system, but we have also official museum and other things that are official but outside the class. We have non-official and non-formal education arena. Obviously, we have all sorts of soundbites in the context, politicians, religious leaders, they all know history. By the way, this is a real kind of unpure discipline, unlike math or something which is very logical. Everybody knows history. Everybody has his kids, everybody knows his history, everybody, which means because history, as Mahmoud Yasbek say, is basically this kind. Family table, stories, so we are dealing with a very, very non-pure setting, which is great. This is the challenge. And in this non-pure setting, there is the national and history education as an independent topic is somehow coalesced with the rise of the national nation state. And obviously, in history education, nation state, it's the cornerstone to create a patriotic education. Within this field, we are not alone. It's an educational process that forming the historical canon. And within this canon, almost everywhere you have a binary model of we against they. We are basically emphasizing one narrative, hegemonical one, and the other serve to emphasize our through. And the conflict situation, the conflict itself is part of the narrative and it enhance and strengthen the narrative. And usually within this narrative in conflict, the we are basically in a double V paradigm, we are victorious victims. This is our V. They are basically vanquished villain. This is their V. So V against V, we are very good on this issue. And as a result, when people look at, for example, Palestinian schools, they see a lot of we as Victorian victim and the other as villain. A lot of Israeli and even Israeli politicians always blame the Palestinian school system and textbook system as bias and promoting conflict. And as we saw in this morning, a lot of Israeli independent researchers did the same on Israeli textbooks. So basically, both sides blame the other side that his textbook is full with double V, somehow incitement. Well, what is in a post-conflict situation in the world? In a post-conflict situation, there is an attempt to somehow take this mythical danger and to change it, to demilitarize it, and to start a process of acknowledgement. Usually, and this is the theoretical cornerstone of my talk, just keep it in mind maybe for the discussion. Usually, I make a lot of research on international textbooks. The process of acknowledgement is a threefold process. First, acquaintance. Acquaintance, my true with your fallacy thing. Then, recognition. My true versus your true. You became critically empathic, as you say, David. In the first stage, you are not empathic, you're critical. And obviously, the last one is the dialogic, negotiating these two. Where we are standing? Well, we are not there. We are not in a French-German multi-perspective narrative that have this weaving together multi-perspective narrative of Europe. We are not even, with two ministers of education, happy to announce a joint project. Although it was a model for us, but we realize we are not there. We are not even there in the European Union imposing multi-perspective on people who did not want multi-perspective, like the Balkan. Well, but they have the European Union, they give the money, they impose it. And they use this model again that it will be the great model. We are not even there. The Chinese, Korean, and Japanese multi-perspective narrative that is sold at more than 500,000 copies, but it's friction of nothing in China. which means that it is sold against the will of the government, which is interesting. I was in a conference in Taiwan and I saw the numbers. Fantastic. We are not there. Where we are in a wind of change, some hope. We thought things are going to change. We thought maybe there will be a move from an in-conflict situation to a post-conflict situation. And in Bejala, I was invited by Sami and Dan to take the leading project on the Israeli side. There was a Palestinian historian, Adnan Masalam, on the Palestinian side, and here we enter this project. I want to emphasize it because it is a context which we try to continue. I think the German president, Johann Rauch, came and showed how it is in Europe, and let's go again. So we failed because there is a reality. And the reality is from the beginning, shattering of the dream, as Sami said, Camp David collapsed, Second Intifada start. I was not allowed to go to Bejala. I had to cheat my wife that I said that I go to Jerusalem, not to Bejala, because, you know. And I'm the good case, because Sami and the Palestinians need to go checkpoint our checkpoint, humiliated by Israeli soldiers, and then talk to peace with me. I at least cheat my wife, who is not cheating his wife a little bit. So, when we thought about the integrative perspective and all these things, we realized it's impossible, and as Sami say, the choice we have either to be defeatistic and to leave everything, or to be pathetic and to continue. So between pathetic and defeatism, we somehow, by default, have this revelation, dual narrative, side by side. And then, when we start this project, I go back to the theoretical, what will be these two narratives? It will be acquaintance, it will be recognition, or maybe dialogue. We didn't know. And we start the process. And we create textbook, and as Sami said, I'll do it very fast. First a booklet, 3 topics. Then on each topic we have 2 teachers assigned. We have only 6, so 2, 2, 2. And we have these groups in Bejala. You see Sami and me 15 years younger. Leidan Baron still there. The rest, we see Rachel even here. Anyhow, methodology I'll skip, but the idea is each one writes his own narrative, the way that he somehow teach at school. Then together there's a binational group on certain topic with no incitement. I don't know what does it mean. Then we have incitement, and it will be deal with, and all this crying and feeling and breaking and crisis. Let's skip. And at the end, we finish to write a narrative by the condition that no one will impose his perception on the other. Palestinians will have their own, and the Israeli their own. And the outcome was quite well, even before, quite well, providing that we work under a very difficult situation, and there is a lot of inequality between this group, and there is a lot of gap, educational gap and political gap between the groups, which I somehow don't want to continue, but I think it caused a lot of problem in the process, which I don't want to do. The result was successful, yeah, as you see. This is the page, and Israeli, Palestinian, and most important, in between, empty. And we can discuss it, what's the meaning of the empty. Well, these were the booklets, and an international success. Kind of astonishing international success. Academic recognition, place by place, conference by conference. We were invited like hell to run all over the world, again and again and again, and have this, and with this came money and respectability and affiliation with Gog Ethic Institute and European Union, and €500,000 euros, and international prizes, and the press was enthusiastic, and Dan and Sami got a lot of award, and Prime got a lot of award. Don't want to go into this detail, it's really great. So we have money, we have success, we have international acclaim, so we extend it into a book, and we have 100 years of conflict, the book that you can see, that Sami showed you, and you can see it here in various languages, Arabic, Hebrew, English. The English did not like the empty space. They say it wastes of paper, but you have this empty space, and also it's like a booklet, it's not like a book, how you can shelve it in the Library of Congress catalog, so there is no empty space. The German did some empty space at the beginning. Italian and French, in Italian way, they didn't translate everything. Only one chapter. And the French with the great introduction of Pierre Vidal Lacqueux. Anyhow, great success. I don't want to go into the Palestinian state and the Israeli state because Sami already did it. I tried some visual example, which mean that the text do not talk with each other. The text themselves are really self-centered. You don't have reconciliation in the text. In the Israeli text, you see a victorious victim text. We are the victim and we won. And I gave it these two examples, but you will have it in the literacy as well. This is the image. We won. We suffered and we won. Palestinian state, we suffer. And we suffer. And maybe that's the case. Huh? There are some history there, some positivistic, which you will not everything is semiotic. Yeah? Some history, someone won, someone lose. And I am not a positivistic historian. People blame me as constructivist. Anyhow, in these pictures, sometimes we are aware of it. For example, on the back cover of the final product, people ask us, what is your most significant picture that you want to put on the back cover? Obviously, the Israelis say, the joy of the United Nations Declaration of Two States, the night of the declaration. This was a kind of iconic picture that we have. And the Palestinians obviously put the Nakba. When you look at that things together, you say, wow, we put this picture next to each other, it aggravates the conflicts because people will interpret it as the reason, the suffering of one side is the reason for the joy of the other side. So there's a lot of discussion, and at the end we decided to mitigate it and to change the Israeli picture. So it gives you some insight to the kitchen of this new product. The kitchen was very hot and very debated and very painful. And this will be some of the outcome. So at the end, you have 5 minutes, wait. At the end, I have only pictures. So, the process of acknowledgement at the end, if you look and analyze it very carefully, and some good intellectual all over the world did it, and I totally accept, what did we achieve? At the end, we achieved acquaintance. We know the other is there. False, I don't accept, but he is there. Any attempt to reach recognition failed. And obviously, dialogue is in the redemptive time when Messiah will come. According to Bennett, not to me, it will come. So this was our achievement, very modest achievement. And we achieved acquaintance, but we do not skip over it. And this is the success. And this is what the reason that the whole world celebrate with us and even somehow pampered us and even tempted us to think that we make such a great achievement. We just were able to acknowledge, to acquaint with each other. And within the context of Israeli-Palestine, it is failure. Why? Because out of the 4 full books that are now in the market, I don't take the Italian and the French, with all due respect, there are booklets. 2 books are banned from the system, the Palestinian and the Israelis, the Hebrew version and the Arabic. In America, almost 12 colleges are teaching side by side, and in Germany, I just came from, I'm spending 2 months sabbatical there, 2-3 schools are dealing with it. Great. But there is one place that you cannot do it, Israel, and the other one, Palestine, which make it a successful failure. Why? I can talk about hours, because as I say, I have 6 hours battery, so I can now talk 5 hours about the reaction of the Israeli institution to this book. Unbelievable. Every minister, and you know, in Israel, whenever you have kind of left, center-left policy, the most leftist side is the Minister of Education, and whenever, unfortunately, you have a right central policy, the most right-wing is the Ministry of Education. So the pendulum oscillates usually like that, but education-wise, the pendulum oscillates like that. So you have Shulamit Aloni, Yossi Sarid, and then Limor Livnat, and then Gidon Saar, and then Yuli Tamir, and then Shai Piron, and now great, I don't want to say the name. But the point is that the pendulum is like that. And therefore we got harsh response. In Israel, officially banned, using bureaucratical language, because Israel is a state with a bureaucracy, we have a committee of textbook approval, and it is banned by the Minister of Education. And the reason it did not go through the process of the committee of textbook approval. When Yuli Tamir was in power, I personally know her very well, we are sharing office, and she said, you know, I cannot do it. I'm up to date with the green line and with everything. I have a bodyguard guarding myself all the time. I cannot do it, although I want. When we look to Gideon Sa'ar, he said, this is an abomination. He threw it in front of the Knesset. So basically in Israel, these were the cases of rejection. In Palestine, I'm not sure, Sami already told you. So, to end this successful failure project, what can we do? Well, first we can be very happy and bless ourselves internationally. Why not? I mean, the whole world is enthusiastic. I'm invited to LA, paid to talk about it and to generate more supporters for this idea. And indeed it is. Indeed it is. But we need to be totally aware that we are doing with a textbook who is banned, ignored by the media, and people are prevented from reading it. And I tell you from experience, as you probably say in the morning, I wrote 8 textbooks to the Israeli public school system. Some of them were on this, 8. 6 of them were approved. 7th was approved after huge turmoil. By the way, this was the one who was here, because I was blamed as a betrayal of the case, as a leftist, as anti-Zionist. At the end, it was approved because Yossi Sarid was the minister. And one was not, the dual narrative. So we can be happy, at least signs of change, because some people use it. And in Israel, the second edition is almost done. We cannot use it in class, but we can use it in teachers' education college, at the university, in youth movement, NGOs, and there is a lot of demand for this particular book. Very positive report from various students who are simply suddenly learn something that is interesting. They can put in between, I hate their narrative. They are not true, they are false. Which gives you, as may soon say, gives you 1 hour of talking with the kids. Well, this is a great success educationally, to take history, the most boring topic in high school, and make it successful, which is unbelievable. And in fact, we're proud of it on that, yes. And a lot of people praise the method. We became an expert of dual narrative method. I wrote 3 articles, I think I even got the promotion to a full professor based on these 3 articles on the advantage of a dual narrative approach in conflict situation, acquaintance, recognition, dialogue, anything. And at the end, it became acquainted with and it showed that there is still a large gap between the group. It's another issue. The group are not parallel. It's not France and Germany. One group is occupied, the other group is under occupation. It's a big difference. And it helped, I think, from an Israeli point of view, to understand the Palestinian and their distress. So at the end, really end, well, we are between vision of reality. There is a vision. Important contribution to the international field of history, education, and conflict area. We were invited, Sami and me, to many places to give the dual narrative method. I personally spent a week in Macedonia, teaching Macedonian and Albanian the dual narrative method. Very interesting. And the locals, well, we paved the way. I think we create conditions for a widespread influence. They are not yet matured, and therefore we are just in the stage of acquaintance. But let's hope we have some seeds, maybe something will grow. So thank you.
With great interest, I have been watching from afar the work of the Dual Narrative History Project for nearly a decade. And I want to offer 2 notes on the potential power of a side-by-side historical approach. 1 note on learning and 1 on teaching. On learning. developmental psychologists have repeatedly shown that both Israeli and Palestinian children develop negative stereotypes of one another from a very early age, sometimes as early as 4, 5, and 6 years old. So for Israeli and Palestinian youth, were they allowed to actually read and study from this textbook, which is a counterfactual statement at the moment, but it doesn't mean it will always be the case? Learning the history of the other has the power or the potential to begin to dispel the myths and negative images learned in childhood. As scholar of history education Sam Weinberg explains, this is why the study of history is so crucial in our present day and age, when issues of diversity dominate the agenda. Coming to know the other, whether they live on the other side of the tracks or the other side of the millennium, requires the education of our sensibilities. And this is what history education, when taught well, gives us practice in doing. For Weinberg, history education holds the potential of humanizing us through the process of learning to humanize the other. Now, this ability to humanize the other may be the most powerful possibility of a dual narrative approach when taken with Israeli and Palestinian youth in the region. But we just heard this language from Eyal of a successful failure in the region. And that leads to the question, but also of this wonderful international success. So that leads to this question: what of those communities, diasporas, in the places where this work is not a successful failure, but where this work is a stunning success? What about Israeli and Palestinian children living here in the United States? And what about those connected to those diaspora communities, like Muslim and Jewish children growing up in the United States with eyes turned towards the Middle East? My own research focuses on American Jewish and Israeli children here in the United States who are learning about life in Israel. I direct a longitudinal study called the Children's Learning About Israel Project, in which I've been following a group of children from the time that they were 5 years old, and they're now all 10. And one of the many things that I've learned about these Jewish children growing up in the United States is that unlike their Jewish age cohort in Israel, they do not have stereotypically negative association with Palestinians. They have no conceptual awareness of Palestinians at all. They know nothing about Palestinian culture, nothing about Palestinian history, and most do not even know the word Palestinian. When they try to talk about Palestinians, they use language like the other guys or the other team. And when you ask them, but who is that other team? They can't answer. But for me, at least, here's the hopeful thing. They yearn to. Starting in around 2nd grade, when children talk about the other team, this is their language, they themselves are frustrated that they have neither language nor conceptual clarity to be able to understand what they themselves know is a much more complicated picture than they are able to see. And they want to know more. And this suggests to me that if the power of a dual narrative approach in Israel and Palestine may be to help dispel myths and stereotypes, then for the children of the diaspora and their linked communities, it may serve an entirely different purpose, building the foundations for a conceptual awareness of the other, not knocking down the scaffolding, but starting it. This is no less important work, but its functions and its effects are potentially quite different for youth inside and outside of the region. And this leads me to a series of questions about teaching. For, as the great educational scholar Lee Shulman explains, any great teacher will have 3 distinct yet overlapping bodies of knowledge. The first is content matter knowledge. A good history teacher, for example, must know history. Not only what was the Balfour Declaration or how did the war in June 1967 lay the groundwork for much of the tension, both political and violent, to follow, but also how do historians construct an account of the past? How do they draw upon sources, corroborate, contextualize? This first body of knowledge, content matter knowledge, is often the source of considerable focus of teacher professional development workshops. The second body of knowledge is pedagogical knowledge, and it encompasses all of the skills and knowledge of good teaching. Knowledge of developmental psychology, of how students learn, of how to lead a discussion or give feedback on a piece of student work. And this body of knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, is often the focus of teacher preparation programs. But the third body of knowledge, which Schulman calls pedagogical content knowledge, is a bit more difficult to pin down. It's that specialized knowledge that lets a good teacher, a great teacher, not only know her subject matter and her students, but help her students know and understand that subject matter. Think back to your own experience as a learner, to a time when you had a teacher who really knew her subject matter, but couldn't teach it very well. I had a physics teacher who was a brilliant physicist, but who couldn't explain a simple equation to us neophytes in his class. And you'll get a sense of what pedagogical content knowledge is. In my work with American Jewish educators who teach about the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, both as a teacher educator and as a researcher, I've learned that there's a really important piece of pedagogical content knowledge that is often ignored in both professional development workshops and teacher preparation programs. Because to be a good teacher of the kind of history that is presented in this dual narrative approach takes much more than understanding the history of Israel, the history of Palestine, and also much more than an understanding of pedagogy. It also takes a profound willingness to sit with discomfort and to help students navigate discomfort. One of the things that I research is the pedagogical dilemmas that American Jewish teachers face when they attempt to teach Palestinian perspectives on Israeli history. Imagine the slides that Sami showed us earlier, right? The Israeli versions of history and the Palestinian versions. So part of what I study is what happens when Jewish teachers try to teach the Palestinian slides there. And these teachers are often torn between two competing visions of the purposes of the history classroom. They want very much to teach critical history, and they understand that critical history demands a commitment to accuracy and to multiple perspectives. And they also want, just as much, to foster their students' sense of in-group loyalty and affiliation with a cherished heritage. But these two visions are often in direct competition. And as historian of education Larry Cuban explains, the choice is often hard because in choosing, one ends up sacrificing something of value to gain a bit of satisfaction on another value. One learns to compromise in negotiating between two things that they want very, very much. This is, for many thoughtful and passionate educators, a profoundly discomforting experience. And no amount of historical content knowledge and no amount of pedagogical skill can help in managing this dilemma. It requires instead a deep pedagogical content knowledge that understands that the history classroom demands a delicate maneuvering between past and present, between history and heritage, between instruction in the skills of critical history, and between open-ended political deliberation about the present and the future. It requires, in short, that educators treat the study of history not as what Tali Zelkowitz calls a china shop, in which ideas are delicately considered and then returned to their rightful places, but rather as a jungle gym, in which classrooms become a playground for exploring and for questioning. In a jungle gym, it's okay if you don't have 2 feet firmly planted on the ground, if your own position moves around, and you don't have to worry that everything you touch might break some cherished heirloom. And the ability to build jungle gym history classrooms is another great power or potential that I see in a dual narrative historical approach. So my question for you, Sami and Eyal, is this. What would it look like, I'm asking you to imagine for a moment, to have a teacher's guide to accompany the existing work of the side-by-side dual narrative history? Because the existing work is a hefty accomplishment of content knowledge, no less so because of the challenges your work has faced and because of the obstacles that the ministers of education have put up. But what might it look like to create an accompanying resource in pedagogical content knowledge that would help educators sit in the kinds of discomfort that comes from attempting to teach with commitments to both historical scholarship and in-group loyalty, the history of the other? What might it take from your experience of working with educators and from their experiences of working with students to help students learn to sit comfortably, willingly, and openly with this kind of discomfort?
And I like to start with an element that for me has always been important. Your location determines to a great extent your voices and your narratives. And I'm here not because I chose to be a university professor speaking in English. I'm here because I finished, when I was 25, my first book was called A Critical Reading of Paulo Freire. And 2 weeks after the Catetat of 1976, I delivered to the publisher, who after 2 very nice hours of conversation recommended me to exile, because the dictatorship was going after the leadership of the student movement. I was one of them. And of course, they were going after people working on Freire. So I thank Professor Myers for the invitation, very kind. And I hope I can do something meaningful in 10 minutes. And I will do something very different that everybody has done, because I didn't have the privilege of reading the papers. I will do 2 different styles in this commentary. The first half will be connected with one part of my life, which many people don't know about it, which I write poetry, I write short stories, I have written 2 novels. So there is a bit of me that appeals to the literary narrative, and I want to bring that into the conversation first. And then, as a social scientist, I like to bring the conversation on the project second. But I think both of them intersect. But let me start with a quote from Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Nobel lecture on the 8th of December, 1982. He finished his lecture in the following way, and I quote, "On a day like today, my master, William Faulkner, said, quote, I decline to accept the end of man, quote. I would fall unworthy of standing in this place, continued Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the place that was his, if I were not fully aware of the colossal tragedy he refused to recognize 32 years ago, is now, for the first time since the beginning of humanity, nothing more than a simple scientific possibility. Faced with this awesome reality that must have seemed a mere utopia, though all of the human time, we, the inventors of tales, who will believe anything, feel entitled to believe that it is not yet too late to engage in the creation of the opposite utopia, a new and sweeping utopia of life, where no one will be able to decide for others how they die, where love will prove true and happiness be possible, and where the races condemned to 1 year of solitude will have, at last and forever, a second opportunity on earth. And this is what we are talking about here. That's the reason I brought this particular sentence. But before I go into the analytical part, let me talk about the challenges of our lives. And in my own narrative, I have decided that there are 5. And they are death, madness, love, memory, and power. Death because invite us to recognize our finiteness, and we try to postpone it as much as possible, but it's going to be part of our life, the last moment of our life. Madness. I know that when I said madness, some of you think of the new analysis about an individual holding the White House. And I'm not going to dispute those journalistic expressions. Of course I won't. It's very clear. And the White House itself has become a house of madness. But I'm not talking about the madness I'm talking about now. I'm talking about your madness, my madness, which will be similar to trying to avoid death. We try to avoid madness, right? So it's important when you make your decisions what to do next in your life to avoid madness in that context. But there is another element of madness, the one that really worries me the most. Do you remember in the Bible when we start talking about this beautiful angel that sat on the right-hand side of God and turned to be Lucifer, right? So essentially, the most cherished angel becomes the devil. And that could happen to all of us. But also, this notion of the devil is about evil. And madness is also a representation of evil sometimes. But all of these could be, in a way, overcome if we agree that love is all we want. I know that you will not disagree with me. You want to be loved. I hope I have done it so many times, and I ask the question, who does not want to be loved? And as soon as I see a hand raising, I imagine the next suicide in the group. People want to be loved. We want to be loved. But also, we want to love. It's impossible to avoid love without being loved. And that is the great tragedy of human life. And that is what all the great civilizations, all the great philosophies, all the great religions take love at the cornerstone of the predicament. So I think, in a way, love gives us an option. But all of these 3 elements I just indicated, death, madness, and love, are all mediated and in many different ways controlled by power. So we live through a process in which power dominates us and we confront power most of the time. So that's another challenge. Unfortunately, we have another element that historians love, memory. The role of the historians is to keep the memory green. And memory is the cornerstone, in my opinion, to preserving human rights. In fact, coming from Argentina, I must say that without preserving human rights in the memory of the atrocities of the 1976-1983 dictatorship, by recognizing what happened and how our humanity was humiliated, we cannot ever come back from that. So I must disagree with Adorno when he said that you cannot not write poetry after Auschwitz. I completely disagree with him. And in my first book of poetry, I challenged Adorno. Unfortunately, he was not there to hear the challenge. But we have to write poetry all the time because poetry is the ultimate expression of our soul. And I think what you have been doing with that attempt to create a dual narrative is to bring back the substantial element of who we are in identities, and maybe poetry, as my compatriot José Luis Borges said, is the ultimate expression of the self. So I have spoken for a minute in the context of literary. I am perfectly timed. I have decided 5 minutes. Now let me go to another 5 minutes. First, a theoretical observation for all of you. I spoke about Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. That book has been one of the most fundamental books in pedagogy in the second half of the 20th century. And he talks about the duality of the oppressor-oppressed relationship. And in a way, it's a psychoanalytical argument. There are many different ways to analyze Freire. And the psychoanalytic argument is that here, right here, each one of us embody in ourselves both the oppressor and the oppressed. But it's a dialectical relationship, and that needs to be recognized. But because the duality in a way exists everywhere. Look at education. We talk about education in the political sociology of education, saying education reproduces the social structures or education transforms the social structures. They do both of them. It happens simultaneously. And the great problem that I think we need to identify is what can we do to push that duality of education toward liberation more than reproduction. That is the great challenge for educators. Now, I am also, and I have the honor to be, the UNESCO UCLA Chair in Global Learning and Global Citizenship Education. So this is the second part of my commentary, maybe adding to the conversation that we have had in the morning and now. In the global citizenship education model that we have created here, and we'll talk about that in a minute, we publish a review, the Global Commons Review. Some of you know about Global Commons. We talk about Global Commons of the outer space. We talk about Global Commons of the high seas. We talk about Global Commons of the defense of the trees that protect our environment and so on. But there are other Global Commons, and I want to talk about that in a minute. We published this, and Dr. Haleli Pinson wrote a very interesting article. I presume she will speak about that, on global citizenship in a hyper-national state, the case of Israel. And we do have all sort of things because there were all sort of arguments being made, like there was a very interesting article about how to teach the Holocaust. All of that in the same first issue. So now I'm making an invitation to you to consider, if you have something important to say, to send me an article. We publish twice a year, February and October. So what are, you have to pass. I have another minute to pass. Give me 1 minute because I just. So assuming that we have different propositions of global commons, let me read what I believe defines global commons. The first one is that our planet is our only home, and that we have to protect it through a global citizenship sustainable development education, moving from diagnosis and denunciation into action and policy implementation. Make no mistake, anything we do affects the environment one way or another. The footprint that we have, the carbon footprint, any other footprint affects our environment. So really the first global common is to pursue what I will call a global citizenship or a planetarian citizenship. And you know why? Because in a conversation with Paulo Freire in his house, 2 or 3 friends having some drinks, he said, there is one missing chapter in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and it's a chapter about the earth. The earth is one of the most oppressed entities. Now, with one of my colleagues, we are trying to write that missing chapter. Secondly, global commons is predicated on the idea that global peace is an intangible cultural good of humanity with immaterial value. Global peace is a treasure of humanity. And for those of you who love history, you may realize that Herodotus was one of the first historians, and he, I quote, said, "In peace, sons bury their fathers. In war, fathers bury their sons." We need to create an evolving world project of peace across our generations, across our civilizations, across our different institutions, and certainly across our civilizations. Thirdly, and I think this is a contribution from the US in particular, global commons is predicated on the need to find ways that people who are all equal manage to live together democratically in an ever-growing diverse world, seeking to fulfill their individual and cultural interests and achieving their inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Since the time is up, I'd like to offer one question to your project. And this question is the following. You talk about dual narrative. I agree with the idea of dual narrative. But could you really analytically argue that each narrative synthesizes fully the different identities embedded in your notion of narrative? I will suspect that it's an economic way to put together two narratives. But inside those narratives, there are multiple identities, there are multiple locations, and there are multiple voices. How do you account for that? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the respondents. I would like to invite the speakers to the front stage. And if you don't mind, I think you should, first of all, answer both respondents' questions, and then I'll take questions from the audience. I would appreciate if we start with some students here first. If some students are here, I would love to hear from you, and then from the rest of the audience.
I think the reflection on the program or the project is very helpful, and it's not the first time actually we hear about that we need to develop teacher's guide that accompany the whole process and the program. And we tried it, actually. We started to collect some data based on the teacher experiences, and we tried to put it together. I think some of it is in the website. But basically, we were afraid also if we create a teacher's guide, would it be mandated for the teacher to use these guides or just only a guideline? So we are debating in teachers. Sometimes teachers said, oh, this is what they want us to do, 1, 2, 3, 4. So they limit themselves to only following these steps. But we have kind of guideline. We propose them for the teachers to be used. And it's true that we need so many resources. Teachers should has much more resources than just basic narrative or basic written text, like videos, films, life experiences of teachers using this narratives in their classroom, and because of it's not an excuse, but because of reality we lived in, as Eyal says. By the time we were producing these nets, we are exhausted by energy to pull things together, and sometimes you lose, what you are supposed to do. And it's not like living in UCLA and try to vision how life is stable, secure, comfortable, there it's not. I think we dragged ourselves and we used a lot of our energy to try to make the process going on, very much how to maintain teachers, commitment, able to come to the meetings, dealing with the group dynamics that dealt with. But it's true, it's need resources. But I would like to also, this is I just like to give one example, which is really very, powerful example when it comes to Vygotsky theory of proximity. When the book translated to Spanish and be used in Catalan area, and Catalan area and the Basque, and the teachers there, they divided the classroom when they taught Balfour Declaration into 3 groups. One Balfour, represent Balfour, one represent Palestinian and Israeli, and make mockery trial for Balfour. And it's very dynamic, it's very active, and pupils learn a lot about this. But when they finished teaching about Balfour Declaration, they went back to teach about their own history. They went into the traditional way of teaching. And one student tell them, can't we teach our history the same way? So that tells you also the limitation of teachers, because when they are, caught into such kind of political reality, yes, there should be resources, but when you look at Eyal mentioned that there's a complete asymmetry existed in the social, even in the education structures. Israeli schools are relatively much more advanced, resourceful. Palestinians are barely, when the PNA started in charge of the schools, some schools run in 3 shifts a daily, 3 shifts a daily. Then they build the school classes now 1 shift daily, most of the classrooms. So that's what. But it's something for hopefully to be filled, and that's. I mean, bringing memory back. It's a very powerful. Example you mentioned. And if I contextualize this in the Palestinian context, who've been living under, I would say, strange foreign authority since the Ottoman Empire in 1516 until now, we lost ourselves because we lost our history, because we denied our access to history. As Samira was mentioning in the morning, the Egyptian were teaching about the Pharaonites and that part of history. Jordanian talking about the great Arab Revolution, the dynasty of the royal Jordanian, and nothing about Palestine. That's something. So it's a kind of craving, motivation to go back and rediscover our history that we deprived from. To top that, when the Israeli occupation in 1967 came, also they banned so many books. So, and I just want to tell a very kind of, example of reality, of course. The Israeli used to come and invaded Palestinian homes at night. And neighbors would talk with each other. What happened? What happened this morning? Oh, they took all the books. Oh, that's good. They took all the books. We didn't realize they took our memory with them. They took our history with them. So it's like instead of destroying the home or killing, they took the books. That's something which is Paulo Freire has an effect on me personally. And that's one thing. It's been, things how to create. Of course, education is a multi-complex process. It's not really one direction rather than the others. It's much more. And if it's not help you in liberation, it will be a kind of, subjugation, and oppression. And Paulo Freire also puts that on us, that the oppressed is required to liberate the oppressors from their oppression. And that's become a very dialectical, challenging. How could we do that? And from this experience, I thought, if the Israeli, of course, oppression and oppressors also gain some privileges. So the privileges become some mechanism to sustain the oppression. And I think the Israeli occupation is really gaining a lot of privileges to the Israeli here and there. So how really to address this issue, we thought as a Palestinian, if an Israeli, whoever they are, try to look at the Palestinian narrative, dare to look at it, encouraged to look at it, motivated to look at it, I think it could be a calling call for trying to rise. Where are we going? Are we going the right direction, or we should stop here and there? So that's also part of that.
Do you have something to add, Eyal? And then I can open the floor for more questions.
Less than a minute. Yeah. One, to answer Sivan. You are right with the teaching's guide, as Sami say. It's another successful failure. But at least at Seminary Kibbutzim, Teachers College of Education, and we'll have some testimony tomorrow, we have a course about discomforting teacher's guide. And this whole notion of discomfort that generate this last stage of this pedagogical attitude that goes beyond skin, we use this book. So there's some example. As far as the multitude of the narrative, obviously you are right, we are not in a stage yet. I think if it will be, in my last model, the dialogue after recognition, we have dialogue, then we can start. As far as Israelis are concerned, we don't have even recognition within our own society. Our president just mentioned that we have 4 tribes, secular Israelis, ultra-Orthodox, national religious, and Arabs. I wish we can start a dialogue between these all tribes. We are not at that point yet.